pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The City of Bothell is now providing the option of attending council meetings remotely or in person. Public comment will be allowed both in writing or verbally. Verbal comments may be taken either in person or remotely. Sign-up sheets were provided online by the City Clerk's office via link from the agenda. A call-in phone number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to listen live to the meeting. If you have called in, we ask that you mute your device. If a participant fails to mute their connection and causes a disruption to the meeting, the connection will be terminated. At this point, we will take a moment to take a roll call of the council members by position number. Please say here when the city clerk calls your name.
Councilmember Zorns?
Here.
Mayor Thompson?
Here.
Councilmember Alders?
Here.
Councilmember McNeil? It's not here. Councilmember Menke?
Here.
Councilmember Dodd?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra. All present with the exceptions of Councilmember McNeil and Deputy Mayor Alcabra.
Thank you, City Clerk.
And actually, I just see, Councilmember McNeil has just joined us, so I'm going to panel him in.
Perfect. All right, next I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For remote meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. Mute your microphone when not speaking. And for council attending remotely, use the raise hand feature when you wish to speak. Are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to presentations, reports, and briefings and public engagement opportunities. All right, so Engage Bothell. You can join us on engagebothell.com to share your opinions and feedback, participate in activities, and learn more about the ongoing Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan process. We've got National Night Out on August 1st of 2023. It's time to start planning your neighborhood's National Night Out gathering. Invite an officer to stop by and say hello. We have a rain barrel painting workshop. You can paint and take home a free rain barrel on Thursday, August 10th from 1 to 4 p.m. at City Hall. Registration is required and spots are limited. All right, next up, we have a proclamation for National Disability Independence Day. There we go. Whereas the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law on July 26, 1990, prohibiting discriminations against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. And whereas the Americans with Disabilities Act seeks to ensure that all people, regardless of ability status, are included fully in all aspects of daily life. And whereas even 33 years after the signing of the landmark legislation, people with disabilities and disability justice advocates must continue to work toward a world in which ableism does not create barriers which impede individuals from participating fully in and enjoying all that our community has to offer. And whereas the anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act is celebrated as National Disability Independence Day and offers an opportunity to recognize the contributions of people with disabilities to the rich tapestry that is our community. And whereas we can work together to reduce barriers such as financial constraints, access to transportation, and provide education on various resources to allow all individuals to recreate safely and freely regardless of their abilities. Now, therefore, I, Mason Thompson, Mayor of the City of Bothell, do hereby proclaim July 26, 2023 to be National Disability Independence Day in the City of Bothell, to celebrate all that our community members with disabilities contribute to our vibrant city and reaffirm our commitment to working toward a more equitable and accessible society. And I believe we have Marissa Bowers here to accept. Thank you both. Thank you very much. This is yours. Thank you. And happy to get a picture, and we can do this like for real in a minute, but if you want to say a few words, you're more than welcome.
Perfect. He's going to actually speak on behalf of others.
Perfect.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council, for having us here. We are honored to be a part of this proclamation. I am Connor Inslee, the Associate Executive Director with the Outdoors for All Foundation. Founded in 1979 here in the Seattle area, we provide adaptive outdoor recreation to individuals with disabilities, serving over 3,000 individuals in the Washington state area. We continue to grow every year, including serving this community here with partners like the Alyssa Burnett Center, and of course cycling along all of the lovely trails and parks that we have here in the park that have been developed and improved over the last few years. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. You guys want to come and get a picture?
Sure.
You want everybody?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on, stand over here.
Yeah. Awesome. Get the logo. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks. Have a good one. You guys, thanks for coming out. We appreciate it.
You betcha. Thank you very much.
All right. Next up is the city manager report. City manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. Just a brief one. I noted that tonight on the agenda, it's a special meeting, and just as a reminder for the public, that is because the Council typically meets on the first 3 Tuesdays of the month, and then in the month of July, with the 4th of July being a holiday and a first Tuesday, we canceled that meeting, and then this meeting becomes then under state law considered a special meeting. Also, the rhythms of, I think the council all knows this, but for the community to follow along, one of the things that is also a norm for the council and part of the protocol is that we do take the month of August off. So just for those who look forward to joining, participating, or streaming our city council meetings, the next council meeting will be scheduled on September 5th or the day after Labor Day. So we'll see you then.
Thank you, city manager. Council committee reports. Councilmember Zorns.
I have a short one. RIA 8 was last week, and most of it was issues about funding and budget, you know, how to fund projects, how to get money to fund projects. But there was also a couple guests who are part, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
I said that feels like most of local government a lot of the times.
Yes, that's true. Had some discussion about concerns for salmon recovery, and there were a couple people reiterated population growth is a really threatening salmon recovery, and David Trout of the Nisqually Indian tribe said that the projected population growth will kill salmon and orcas, and so funding should be linked to salmon recovery in the GMA. And I thought that would might be an interesting observation from someone outside the city, their perspective on salmon recovery. And then we got to hear a group of youth that are down in the South Sound and have been involved for a while. It's teens. It's called Unleash the Brilliance for salmon recovery, and they are an enthusiastic group and ready to make their mark on the world. So that's the extent of I thought that you would want to hear about RIA 8.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else. So I will move to visitor comment. The city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to the city clerk no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all city council members and are part of the record. When the clerk calls your name, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Please note that council will receive your input, but upon the advice of our city attorney, we do not engage in discussion of these topics. Staff will make note of items requiring follow-up. City clerk, do we have anybody signed up?
We do, Mayor Thompson. Before we call on them, I would like to remind commenters that while you may speak to whatever topic you choose, we ask that if you are a council candidate, you do not use this time to speak to your own campaign. And prior to calling people up, I will say we received 2 written comments. One was from Sarah Jameson, who wrote regarding the 911 dispatch operators. And we received written comment from Mark Swanson, who wrote regarding King County and DNR video, which he provided. So the first person I have on the list tonight is Brian Foth. Mr. Foth, when you come up, just speak. You'll have 3 minutes, and the light will turn green as soon as we set it, and when it'll turn yellow at 30 seconds. Go ahead, whenever you're ready.
It's already on. It was already.
Okay. Hey everyone, my name is Brian Foth. I use he and pronouns, and I'm the Director of Accessibility and Student Support Services at Cascadia College. My comments will be brief tonight. I'm here to support the City of Bothell's proclamation for National Disability Independence Day. I was very encouraged to be reached out by Gabby from the City of Bothell and hear about all the great things that their office is doing to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. As was mentioned in tonight's proclamation, while the ADA was a landmark legislation that gave many disabled people access that never had access before to transportation, to municipalities, and so on, we need to keep acknowledging that there's more work to be done. The ADA failed to recognize the intersection between disability and underrepresented populations, digital accessibility, and employment of disabled people in the United States of America. At Cascadia College, we fully support the city's efforts to acknowledge tonight's proclamation and to recognize those that worked so hard and tirelessly to make the ADA possible. I'd like to thank everyone for their time and thank everyone for acknowledging tonight's proclamation.
Thank you. Next up, we have Whitney Nagenbauer.
Good evening, Council. My name is Whitney Nagenbauer. This evening, I'm offering public comment on behalf of the Bothell Parks and Recreation Board as the board chair. We would like to present to Council an update on our activities over the last quarter. In the future, we will utilize the board and commission reports agenda item rather than utilizing public comment. Between April and the end of June, 3 members were reinstated to the board and three board members were also appointed. Meetings changed from bi-monthly to monthly. This quarter, we've enjoyed learning about each member's backgrounds, perspectives, skill sets, and interests, finding ways to align our energy with the Bothell Parks and Recreation Department's projects and the Council's 2040 vision. In terms of actionable items, our main area of focus has been supporting Parks and Recreation Department in the outreach and development of inclusive playgrounds within the city. A subcommittee formed led by Maggie Catlin with the charge of compiling a targeted list of contacts and together with city staff inviting these individuals, groups, and businesses to attend the July 15th community meeting. Moving forward, we plan to continue community outreach and engagement on the Inclusive Playground project and offer guidance and feedback on the exciting capital projects that are now in development following the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Christina Brown. Oh, there she is. She's actually virtual, so I'm going to panel her in. Christina, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Christina Brown. I'm the Director of Public Affairs at Kindering. And I just wanted to use this moment of public comment to give brief but very sincere thanks on behalf of Kindering to the mayor and to the council for issuing this proclamation recognizing disability independence and in alignment with Disability Pride Month. So why is this so important to Kindering? As you may know, we have one of our 4 campuses is in Bothell, and we reach 10,000 children and families every year with special education services, pediatric supports, family supports, and other trainings for providers throughout the area. And so we are very close to the disability community in King and Snohomish counties. And we want to see a world where people with disabilities are included fully in every aspect of life, whether that is in education, whether that is in employment or in healthcare. That is part of the vision that we see for the world. And so we think it's very important to be celebrating this month. And of course, most importantly for us, we want to make sure that the kids that we serve grow up to feel pride in all that they do and feel that they can contribute to society, and their parents also feel pride for their work. And so, so I just want to thank you for recognizing this day and just offering support on behalf of Kindering as we also celebrate Disability Pride Month. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Katie Hodneland. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Hodneland, but hey,
Okay.
it's fine. Thank you, first of all, to the council members and everyone here who allows we citizens to come and speak, saying what we think and have to say. My name is Katie. Again, I'm here with my husband, Bjorn, and we'd like to address some concerns that we have regarding our future in the city of Bothell. And now I think about it, and when I use the word our, we're talking about more than just me and Bjorn. Bjorn and I have been in Bothell as homeowners since 1996. Back then, we worked, saved, and ate top ramen in order to afford our first little home just right up the street. And when the time came to start a family, we chose to stay in Bothell because we liked it. It was affordable, safe, and was thriving as a family-friendly suburban community and such. In 2000, we purchased the home that we are still currently in, and in 24 years, we have raised 2 children. We have worked, volunteered, supported Bothell business and schools, paid taxes, voted, even possibly helping some people who are our current city council members. We have established roots and made lifelong friends through church, school, neighborhood, events, sports, etc. Now, as we look toward our future as soon-to-be retirees, we have to decide if we want to stay in Bothell or leave. Right now, we see the increase in crime with less police enforcement. We see the influx of residents through high-density housing without infrastructure to accommodate traffic and road improvements. We see less responsiveness from city officials when we address our concerns. And as an aside, I have tried to use the link on the city website, talk to the council, and everything gets bounced back. So that probably needs to be addressed. And overall, we are just seeing a decline in the livability in the city of Bothell that wasn't what we saw 30 years ago when we decided to raise our family here. So we question what, if anything, is being done to compel long-term homeowner residents to stay here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mark Swanson.
Thank you, Laura, as always. Well, we're about ready to go on the summer break. Greetings to the council and staff. And I know I've been hard on you this year, and I keep showing up. This is as nice as I possibly can be today to send you guys off on your summer relaxed. So sit back. I'm not going to get mad or hammer you today. It's not what I'm here for. 13,000 years ago, Seattle was covered by 1,000 feet of ice. Vancouver, BC was covered by, no, 1,000 feet, I'm sorry, that's a mistake. It was covered by a mile of ice. Vancouver was covered by 2 miles of ice. This, Vancouver, BC, this ice shelf went from the state of Washington all the way to the state of New York and way up into Canada. And scientists starting to converge that 13,000 years ago, a giant meteor or comet came crashing down through the stratosphere at 43,000 miles an hour. It hit the ice shelf. They figure it was about 150 miles wide, and it melted it all from the bottom up. It wiped out the American camel, the saber-toothed tiger. It wiped out our mega fauna, and it wiped out mostly human beings. And you guys have all heard about the woolly mammoths in Siberia that died with buttercups, got froze to death with buttercups in their stomach. It's about the same time this happened. But there are kokanee that survived out there in Siberia. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I've got to say, Councilmember Aldrichs in the last planning session talked about an underground tunnel. And for someone who lived in Moscow, Russia, on Svertskaya Ulitsa, which is the big street that goes down Red Square, the Russians don't mess around. We can eliminate at least one crosswalk, and I know that we can sell that idea on a citywide initiative. We're a code city since 1974. I know I can sell that. Last thing, Mayor Thompson said, what would be the coolest thing for Lot P? Here's my vision. Plant a bunch of sequoias around a water park that's fed by the stream next door, feeds the fountain, no machines, no electricity, no nothing. And 1,000 years from now, and imagine Bothell, 3023, the sequoias will still be alive, and 40 generations of Bothellites will thank you guys for that courage.
Thank you. That's all I have signed up. Is anybody else in the audience that wishes to speak? Would you, I know who you are, but would you state your name, please? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Ewing, a former council member and mayor of Bothell. I saw on the agenda tonight you have a study session, unfortunately, so the public can't engage with you in that process. But one of the things that concerns me is the dumbing down of the land use map within the comprehensive plan. I disagree with staff assessment that this level of detail is not necessary. These maps were developed over many years, many councils, lots of engagement with our community. It provides the roadmap for how the city is intended to develop. It tells you at a glance what areas have already developed, at what density, and that what areas are yet to develop or redevelop. So it does provide a lot of useful information by having that detail. It shows you that in general, the density was placed closer to the infrastructure to support it, and where the infrastructure wasn't there, there were lesser densities. That's good planning. If you get rid of the details on the map, that just gives a green light for the development to occur randomly. The developers can choose then where the intensity is going to go and how the community is going to develop. I think that's a really, really bad idea. The people in Bothell really, really care about the character of their community. And to have that stricken from the comprehensive plan is also a bad idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ewing. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak, or anyone online that wishes to speak? If so, please use your raise hand function. Give them a minute. That's all I have, Mayor Thompson.
Thank you so much, Clerk. Excuse me. All right, next up is projected agenda discussion. All right, seeing none, I would love to entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Councilmember Dodd?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Dodd and a second from Councilmember Aldrich to approve the consent agenda. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councilmember Mankey.
Thank you, Mayor. I've been advised by the city attorney to disclose that per RCW 4223-030 and 4223-040, I have a remote interest in Agenda Bill number 23112. In order to provide full transparency and to comply with RCWs, I request that the city clerk note in the official minutes that I own 15 shares of Microsoft stock.
Thank you. All right, City Clerk.
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns,
Yes.
Mayor Thompson,
Yes.
Councilmember Alder,
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Mankey,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd.
Yes.
Passes 6-0 with Deputy Mayor Alcabra absent and excused.
Thank you. All right, moving on, our first agenda bill of the night is Agenda Bill 23117, consideration of adoption of ordinance initiating condemnation of a franchise utility easement for the Meridian Avenue South and 240th Street Roundabout project. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, we do have a couple items on for tonight. Just by way of background, I'll note a little personal connection too, that this first presentation actually brings us back to June 25th, which was my first city council meeting with you. So I remember we first talked about this roundabout project, and I think we came back actually in July then too to follow up with some questions from council. So I'm sure most of you will remember that as well. We've been progressing now for about a year, and as Alex gets PowerPoint to cooperate, no share disclosure necessary for that one. I'm going to turn it over to our capital project engineer, which is Alex Copeland, to present and answer any questions that you might have. I overconfidently jinxed you. I'm sorry. Looks good.
Turn your mic on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, City Manager, for the introduction. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. My name is Alex Copeland, and as a capital project engineer, I am here today on behalf of the Capital Division to update you on the city's Meridian Avenue and 240th Street Roundabout project and explain why Capital is seeking the adoption of an additional ordinance. Also here with me today is Ryan Roberts, our supervising capital project engineer, who will provide support during the Q&A portion of this presentation. Specifically, the council action we are seeking is the adoption of an ordinance initiating condemnation of a franchise utility easement for the Meridian Ave South and 240th Street Roundabout project. The design for this project is nearly complete. The right-of-way phase is still ongoing, and it is for this phase I am here today. The right-of-way phase really began in June 2022 with Council's adoption of Ordinance 2379. Ordinance 2379 authorized the acquisition of real property by eminent domain for the construction and maintenance of the roundabout project. Within this adopted ordinance, there were 3 areas of real property named, one of which is shaded blue inside the parcel on the screen. Within that same parcel, there is an existing Sprint easement, which is shaded yellow. At the time of Ordinance 2379's adoption, the city was unaware of the existence of this easement. Due to the portion of the easement existing within the area of acquisition, Sprint's interest should have been included and named under Ordinance 2379. To remedy this oversight, an ordinance has been drafted with the same goals and requirements as Ordinance 2379, but with Sprint's interests included this time. Therefore, the council action we are seeking is the adoption of an ordinance initiating condemnation of a franchise utility easement for the Meridian Ave South and 240th Street Roundabout project. So short and sweet. I open it for questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Zorns.
A real quick question. Is this easement being actively used right now?
Yes, there is an existing Sprint fiber within the easement at this time.
Okay. And I talked with the city manager about this in our one-on-one, so I want to make sure that I'm clear on it. When there's an acquisition of it, the easement just gets moved, is also part of the acquisition. So an easement can continue to exist, or what sort of things conversations are we having with Sprint, if we can,
Yes.
or T-Mobile?
That is correct. It's the acquisition of the property, the real property, and then there's easements. So they're two different acquisitions. They're totally separate. So once we do purchase or we do acquire the right-of-way that we need for the project, that easement will still remain inside the right-of-way unless we ask them or negotiate to relinquish that.
Okay, so the easement will still exist in the right-of-way, so then it will become a dual use for the
Well, it's not
roundabout.
necessarily an easement, or rather a dual, yeah, I guess in a manner of speaking, you can say that. But what it means is the city, they have a right to be there, and we can't necessarily, if they needed to do something to their line, they have every right to remove our improvements and not put them back, because they were there first. They have the right to be there. And whatever was agreed to originally as part of that easement still holds true.
Okay, so it's more of us acknowledging that we have this project coming forward, and we're setting ourselves up to recognize that they're there, and that we will need to probably accommodate them in the future if they have need to access their fiber or whatever it is.
Well, part of the agreement, what we'll do is, we're in current negotiations too with them. We are going to be requesting them to relinquish that easement, essentially vacate it, and then they have, obviously their facilities can remain in the right-of-way. It just would stand under an existing franchise agreement.
Okay, all right, thank you.
If nobody else has anything to say, I would entertain a motion. Councilmember Dodd?
I move the recommended action.
All right, I've got a motion from, okay, cool. I've got a motion from Councilmember Dodd and a second from Councilmember Aldrich to move the recommended action, which is to approve the condemnation ordinance for the Meridian Avenue South and 240th Street Roundabout project. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councilmember Mankey.
Thank you, Mayor.
8 shares of Sprint.
Yes, I've been advised by the city attorney to disclose that per RCW 42-23030 and 42-23040, I have a remote interest in this agenda bill. To provide full transparency and comply with these RCWs, I request the city clerk note in the official minutes that I own 35 shares of T-Mobile stock, the owner of Sprint Communications Company, LP.
Fantastic. City clerk?
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns,
Yes.
Mayor Thompson,
Yes.
Councilmember Alders,
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil,
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd.
Yes.
Passes 6-0 with Deputy Mayor Alcabra absent and excused.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. All right, next up, we have Agenda Bill 23122 First Amendment to the Interlocal Cooperation Agreement regarding the Community Development Block Grant Program between the City of Bothell and King County. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And just for awareness for those who may have read your packet on Thursday, this is an item that what I'll call out is that we did republish our agenda prior to the statute requirements for timing to add this item. For background, the city was notified along with a number of other King County entities of change which has been required within community block grant program agreements. City of Bothell entered into an interlocal cooperation agreement with King County back in 2014 related to CBDG funding. That one always catches me. And this particular change has to do with a requirement to have language included hereforth related to fair housing and civil rights obligations. So this is a technical requirement in nature. It's something that's passed on by the federal government, but non-compliance does put both the county and then the community at risk of not being eligible for funding. I will note that our staff did some quick research on this and trying to make sure that we understood the scope. And while the city itself has not received any funding directly that would be affected by this, we do also want to make sure that we don't, through a procedural decision, don't cut off the opportunity for other partners within the community or region or individuals to be able to qualify for them either. So there's not much to speak to of the impact of this other than this is a situation where we have our county partners who are truing up language as required by federal requirements. And we're happy to work with them in compliance. We did add this item then after publication, but again, before the 24 hours, because of the fact that the council is going on recess then, and there's a tight deadline that King County made us aware of on Friday afternoon. So happy to do that. I will also note one of the questions I would anticipate or I'd be asking myself, and I think we did ask, is what about Snohomish County? And so staff has reached out to Snohomish County to see if they have to make the same amendments. And the answer is that they do. They're on a slightly different time frame though, and so we don't know exactly when we're going to receive that, but I would anticipate that probably sometime in the September fall time frame that will bring us very similar agreement to this. It'll likely go on consent, but we'll explain the why behind it. And then again tonight is mainly just to make sure that we highlight this change, explain why it appeared on the agenda, and leave it up to council to take a vote.
Councilmember Dodd.
This might be a silly question, but why are the two counties on different timelines?
Always a great question. And I don't know the exact specifics. I do know from context of reading through the emails between both counties that there's a renewal that they are going through that then triggers this. And so I do suspect that part of that is that they're just on a different schedule that's close. And also, I will just say, this is conjecture and guessing, which I don't normally go with, but because we're trying to piece this together, every agency has their own timelines in the internal process that they have to meet as well. And I do know that King County government is a much larger organization, and if they're having to coordinate with the different cities who are signed on to this agreement, they also might need more time on their end, and also to get it in front of their council and that sort of a thing. And so I think that could also play into effect. But we did reach out to Snohomish County. They're aware of it. They're preparing to make the change, and they said that they didn't have anything that we would need to do before August. So
Thank you.
we took that as confirmation.
Councilmember Alders.
Thank you, Mayor. One question I have is, are there currently any agencies in Bothell that are receiving community block grants?
Not to my knowledge, but we can certainly look at that and provide a response from our human services staff.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to know. And also, is there any technical assistance for agencies to obtain funding like that, to seek from the federal government?
Offered by the city or from the county or either?
Either, yeah.
We'll find out.
Okay, thank you.
If nobody else has any questions, I will entertain a motion.
I motion to move the recommended action.
Second.
All right, I have a motion from Councilmember Aldrich and a second from Councilmember Zorns to authorize the city manager to execute the First Amendment to the Interlocal Cooperation Agreement regarding the Community Development Block Grant Program between the City of Bothell and King County. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, City Clerk?
Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Aldrich?
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil?
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
Passes 6-0 with Deputy Mayor Alcabra absent and excused.
Fantastic. All right, we are going to recess for a 9-minute break. It is 6:41. We will be back at 6:50 for a study session.
Not quite, but we have.
Oh, no, that's right.
We have a couple other items.
A couple other before we get it. Okay,
Yeah.
not for a study session, but we're going to break for 9 minutes.
Yes, that
Perfect.
part's true.
I'll see you all at 6:50. All right, next up we have Agenda Bill 23118, Resolution regarding King County Proposition 1, Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy. City Manager Stannard.
Thank you, Mayor. We are returning tonight after receiving a request 2 weeks ago to bring before council the opportunity to consider support or opposition for a levy going before voters next week. And so we've been working on it. We thank you for the ability to have a couple of weeks to work on this, and we're staff responded well. One of the things we did ask for was a presentation for King County so that we could start off the conversation with an informational briefing about what is making up the levy, what's part of that. And we're really thankful that King County staff agreed to come here tonight and to give an overview for council. So with that, I'd like to introduce our colleagues from King County, Leon Richardson and Jennifer Lyman, and I will turn it over to them to guide us through with some facts.
Good evening, Leon Richardson. I'm the Division Director for Adult Services within King County's Department of Community and Human Services.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jennifer Lehman. I am the Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy Renewal Manager within King County Department of Community and Human Services. So I will kick off our presentation today. We have a number of slides. This is our basic slide deck that we have been bringing out to city councils and other groups to give factual information about the Proposition 1 that is before voters on the August 1st primary ballot. In the interest of time, I may skip through or briefly cover a few slides, but I'm happy to go back and cover in more detail some slides. So on the ballot next week that voters have, there is a property tax levy lid lift. This is a 10-cent property tax. The Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy is a funding measure first enacted by voters in 2005. It's since been approved 3 times each time that it's been on the ballot. This ballot measure is 10 cents. This is the same rate that was approved by voters in 2017. It's comparing it to what taxpayers are paying today. This is approximately 1.9 cents difference of the rate as looking at the growth in property values. So the impact on property homeowners would be $83 in 2024 or a $17 a year increase. The overall initiative is expected to bring $560 million over the 6 years, and funding is allocated towards a third for veterans, a third for seniors, which we define as adults who are aged 55 or older, and a third for resilient communities. 10% of the funding will go towards initiatives and issues that broadly impact those 3 population areas. So when we say human services, we mean broadly regional and human services. That means emergency financial assistance, affordable housing, job and training placement supports, survivor supports for domestic violence and gender-based violence, as well as senior centers. So we group the services and strategies that we fund through this levy through 5 result areas that we have listed on the slide. Next slide. This is a funding that funds broad programs throughout the county. We have over 300 programs and strategies funded through the strategy, and over 150 community-based organizations, a number of organizations located here in North King County, including the North Shore Senior Center, Kenmore Senior Center, and the Shoreline Senior Center. 185,000 people across King County have been served by the current levy that taxpayers are paying for today, and more than 100,000 of those are seniors. Keep going, next slide. We have a couple of items and visuals that we have for the things that are funded through the levy. 39 senior centers, reduction, 40% reduction in veteran homelessness, and 120 units of affordable housing built through this current levy. This funding proved to be very impactful during the COVID-19 pandemic, as organizations needed to adapt and shift quickly to the changing needs in their communities. Next slide. A number of other things that are funded through this levy. One piece that is two things that are fairly unique. One is the creation of the domestic violence hotline, a countywide hotline that is available to people through call, text, messaging in a variety of languages, so that people can connect to services that they need across the county. The other is the Collaborative Case Management Program. This is something that our King County Veterans Program worked with the Federal Veterans Administration and the King County Housing Authority to be able to better connect veterans with the federal housing vouchers and the available affordable housing units throughout King County. Next slide. One question that often comes up through our community engagement and through these meetings is that the county and governments bring forward these funding measures time and again. Where does the money go towards, and is the funding effective? So on our King County website, which you can access through this QR code, we have a number of dashboards laying out the allocation of the funding for each program, maps of program participants and where services are available, as well as information in our annual reports about the progress of programs and specific stories about groups that are helped through this levy. Next slide. As I mentioned before, there's impact across the county, but I wanted to give some specific examples of how this levy shows up in North King County. The levy has contributed to 130 units of affordable housing here in North King County, with the Shoreline Veterans Center, as well as a number of units for a supportive housing place in Bothell for adults with developmental disabilities. We also moved the King County Veterans Program from Belltown to Northgate in order to better access veterans and have a better access point for people in North King County. The North Shore Senior Center has also partnered with Kenmore Senior Center and the Peter Kirk Community Center to create a senior hub to better serve seniors throughout North King County. Next slide. We did a number of community engagement to help inform this proposal across the county, including meetings here in Bothell and Kenmore. Next slide. So if renewed, there are a number of things that we expect to do in the renewal. We have an implementation plan that is due to our council later this year if voters choose to approve it. Some key things is that we will be looking to double our current funding for senior centers, as well as deepening the programming for domestic violence and gender-based violence survivors. Next slide. A brief renewal of the overall work that we've been doing. We started planning of this at the beginning of 2022. August 1st is the primary election. That is next week. And again, as a part of that proposal, we are required to put forward an implementation plan which details spending for the initiative, and that was due to our county council at the end of October. Slide. Thank you very much for the time. I'm not sure if I'm over, but we were here to answer your questions.
Councilmember Alders.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for being here and presenting this. It sounds like you've given this presentation to several other King County cities, and I'm wondering a couple of questions on that. How many cities in King County have endorsed the levy, and are there any cities who voted against endorsing it if it came to a vote?
We can absolutely get you the number on how many cities have endorsed. I don't have that number handy, or we don't have that number handy. But to our knowledge, there hasn't been one city that has had it before them as an action item and chosen not to endorse it.
Got it. Thank you. And one of the I think one of the data points that you've shared with us that's really impressive is a 40% reduction in veteran homelessness. That is amazing. And I'm wondering if there is any kind of goal or projection that would that you might know about for a further decrease in veteran homelessness with the renewal of the levy.
That's a great question. We haven't put a number specifically on it, but our intent is to continue the trend. We started a first-in-the-nation pilot called Collaborative Case Management with the Department of the VA and with our King County Housing Authority. We are looking to expand that partnership with the Seattle Housing Authority and continue to work to get homeless veterans housed throughout King County. Additionally, with the King County Regional Homeless Authority, we reached an agreement with them that has King County remaining in the lead when it comes to focusing on veterans homelessness, in large part due to the large veterans infrastructure that we already have existing within King County in terms of our direct service programs.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Last question is with the hub located for veterans in Northgate, is there any kind of like transportation support for folks who are coming from, North King County cities like Bothell to get to the Northgate hub?
So the short answer is yes. So it's right along the light rail. It's, I want to say, 2 blocks away from the light rail. So there's a path there. Specifically coming from Bothell, if there's a veteran that's in need and has transportation issues, they can contact our King County Veterans Program, and they can assist the veteran with getting either physically to that location or potentially to another King County location where they can either meet in person or virtually with staff.
That's great to know. Thank you.
Councilmember Zorns.
Are we supposed to just ask questions, or can we say thank you?
I'm going to make an executive decision that you can say thank you.
Okay. I just want to say this, for people who very quickly become invisible, our veterans, our seniors, people who are suffering under domestic violence, this is important work, and I really appreciate your presentation. I wish everyone could see it and know that it's going on. So thank you for bringing this to us.
We greatly appreciate that, and I would not be doing my due diligence if I didn't acknowledge the numerous community-based organizations that enable us to do all this great work. And so I think the Veteran Seniors and Human Services Levy is a great example of partnership and collaboration at local, county, federal, and with many nonprofit partners to do a lot of amazing work. And so it's definitely a team effort.
All right. I just have a couple things to say. Number one, thank you for coming out here and having this conversation with us, and thank you for the work you're doing, supporting folks in our community who need it the most. I think how we treat people in society who need our help the most says a lot about who we are and who we want to be as a group of people, and who I want to be is somebody that takes care of the folks that need it the most. I think we've gotten great results from what we've had already. The voters have voted yes multiple times on it, and I'm particularly excited about the deepening of services, especially around senior centers and gender-based violence. So I will be voting in the affirmative, and I would happily entertain a motion should someone feel the need to make it. Councilmember Dodd?
Do we need to proceed through offering public comment and
That's
such?
right. We need to do those things. Thank you. There's a different process here.
Like, I think your script is telling you what's next.
Yes. Well, I've got my script and then I've got this other paper here. All right. So, City Clerk, do we have anybody signed up to speak?
We do not.
All right. I'm going to ask staff for help in terms of what to do next.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Eileen Kiefer, your interim city attorney. So we are operating under RCW 4217A.555 that allows action taken by this body to either affirm or support, oppose, or take no action on the ballot measure. And one of the things that council can do is have just approximately equal time to express opposing views on this matter. So if council wants to speak to it, I think Robert rules really kind of cover that anyways, of, equal opportunities to speak, but just kind of know that's in the back of our heads with respect to this presentation.
So from here, the next logical step would be to make a motion to approve.
Yes.
Fantastic. Councilmember Dodd?
Thank you. I am reading, and okay. I move that we adopt the resolution supporting King County Proposition 1, Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy on the August 1st, 2023 ballot.
I'll second the motion.
All right, I have a motion from Councilmember Dodd and a second from Councilmember Aldrich. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councilmember Zorns.
Well, I kind of want to cry foul because this is a very important topic. And so please don't take this personally. I had to, because I love everything's in here. You got my vote. If you had a sign, it'd be in my yard. But we don't have this in our protocol manual yet. And I had to ask myself if it was another issue entirely, and it would involve Snohomish County, how would I feel if I lived in Snohomish County and have members of city council who live in King County support a bill that has nothing to do with them? And so I'm not going to vote no on this, but I'm going to abstain because we've got to get this in the protocol manual. I think we need to have the discussion that do we just lend support to state-funded issues, or is council okay with having it split across counties? But I need that conversation first. And please don't take it as I don't support. I do so much, But I want to make sure that the ripple effect of this, we don't set a precedent that comes back and we regret later. So I'm going to abstain on this.
Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments, Councilmember Zorns. I struggled with that as well. We don't have a framework in our protocol manual. I also think that, and maybe this is from my background in technical documentation, but you cannot cover every possible scenario in a document. So I too am very interested in getting a framework for future discussions in the manual. I do want to emphasize that our representation and most of our programs do not stop at the county line. This is, it's rare to have two of us on our body who even live in the Snohomish County part of the city. We see that in the infrastructure and recreation and facility differences in the county. So I don't, for me, this is not the time to throw the county line into the mix because it hasn't necessarily stopped things from happening before. And we don't just represent where we live, we represent all of Bothell, and that's so important because we do have a county line across our city, and it's nearly 50-50 at this point. I think that this levy does amazing work, as you said, and that is why I think, given that this isn't anything other than this one levy under discussion, I'm going to vote to support it, and I think it does amazing work. And I know that some of the providers, if not all of them in Bothell that benefit from these funds, don't stop at the county line either. The senior center, I was there a few weeks ago talking to Cliff, who runs the transportation program. And we talked about the challenges of running transportation when we have community transit and metro and county lines. And the Mill Creek Senior Center is technically part of it, and they have a whole different structure. There's a lot that goes into it. And I think that any voices, including our own as a full body of 7, that we can lend to this effort is really critical. And this helps tell the story to our residents what this money does. So it's a small thing. It's a week before the election, but I'm happy to support it. And I just wanted to say that I'm cognizant of the many times that King County residents who represent me on the city council have voted for things and funded or not funded things for me as a Snohomish County resident. And given all of that and just the nature of our 2-county city, I thought about it a lot, but I'm fully okay with representing that here. Thank you.
Councilmember Alders.
I'm also happy to speak to the motion. This really came to us because our community partners, NUSA and the Senior Center, asked us to endorse it. This also came up in the North King County Coalition on Homelessness, which is a body that I serve on as a committee member appointed by the council here. And so I know just how deeply our community partners care about this work and how much they rely on the county to be able to complete their work. And so for me, I very much want to support and encourage our local agencies and show our support when they ask for it. Like my colleagues have said, this levy does excellent work. And at some point in the near future, we are going to be able to talk about how do we make this a clear process in our policy and procedure manual. But I often feel like we cannot let the absence of procedure stop us from doing things when there's nothing saying that we can't. So we may be in uncharted territory, having done this once before where we supported a resolution. But this is such an important issue and topic with the encouragement of our local partners that I'm very pleased to support this and look forward to staff bringing back to us the opportunity to clarify and put this into our procedures in the future. Thank you.
I wasn't sure if you were going to want to or not. Go ahead, Councilmember Mankey.
Thank you, Mayor. Talked a little bit about my position a couple weeks ago when we discussed this. First, I just want to say thank you to King County for coming and presenting to us. I think seeing the data and seeing that there's transparency out there for where the money's going to go, where the money has gone in the past is incredibly valuable. People can see, those dollars coming out of their property taxes and going to something tangible, which is what we all want to see. The success stories of veterans being housed is fantastic. It's better than I thought it would be. So very impressed with that. My personal position on anything not related to the business of the city of Bothell has been that we don't take a stance on it. Again, I went into it a couple weeks ago, why I believe that. I believe the voters should decide for themselves what is best for them. This one obviously has been passed 3 times previously, which is a really good sign. The voters are supportive of these services. And as a council, we have not engaged in that before, either this council or previous councils. That doesn't mean that we can't. And I am open to those discussions if council decides they want to do that. That's great. And maybe I'll change that position in the future after a lot of discussion and more thought. I've given this a lot of thought over the last week and today as well. But what I did see is that we don't have a criteria established in our protocol manual from which to work from. We don't know which ones we're going to support or oppose based on what measures. We haven't talked about what agencies we'll consider, how we'll consider them when we bring them up ourselves, whether citizens bring them to us or residents bring them to us. We also haven't talked about, what the outcome is that we're looking for with this. Are we trying to encourage people to vote for it? Are we, are we saying that we support it, but we want everybody to make up their own minds? We haven't had that discussion, and I have reservations about that. Again, to Councilmember Dodd's point, just because we haven't done it before doesn't mean we can't do it. We can't change direction, but I think if we're going to do something like this and we're going to start a new precedent that we haven't done in the past, we need to have a broader conversation about it and really talk about the reasons why we want to go that direction. And again, how we want to go about it, how we will consider it, what we will consider. Those are all important things for us to do. Unfortunately, this one came before us before we could do that. We could have done that up to this point with this council over the last year and a half, but we haven't done that yet. So while I personally think this measure does good things, I am not in favor of our council taking a position either way, pro or con, at this time. So I'll be voting no on this resolution because it's not a neutral, no position motion.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't rehash the comments that Councilmember Mankey made, but he did make some extremely good points about the protocol manual and processes and procedures. But I think the most important piece for me is that we've had some very robust discussions around the county from not just a local level, but from a regional level on this levy and the success of this levy and what it's done. And so first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to everyone for all your hard work and dedication on this. The help that is achieved from this levy is immeasurable. And so I believe that it's something that definitely will pass. I do support it. However, there's a procedures and a processes that are in place for a reason. And because I don't feel that we should at this time pass this, I do believe that we should as individuals support it. And I believe in the past history has shown that we as a council have not supported or done these things. And this levy's been fine standalone. So I think by our word going out and doing the work that we do in the community and raising awareness around it, I think it'll be successful in that manner. I 100% support the senior center, chair the committee on the MPRSA, do the work to help build the facility up and keep the facility open. And so I think it's important that we all realize when we're having these conversations, because we vote no or abstain or yes, it's not an end all decision, meaning that because I say I abstain or I say no, it does not mean I do not support something.
It just means that I'm following my heart and voting the position that I feel I need to vote based on the information that I have at hand. So I just wanted to throw that out. That I've heard some strong words thrown around today about supporting or not supporting the community and the seniors and the veterans. And I will tell you, just full disclosure, I 100% support seniors. I support veterans. I support my entire community. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm on record stating that because of my vote today does not mean I do not support. I 100% support my entire community.
I guess I'd just point out a couple things, is that the senior center serves in PRSA, which includes all of Bothell. NUSA serves all of Bothell. And if our policy manual doesn't speak to something, or if we haven't done something in the past, I just don't see those as a good reason for me to not take action that would positively impact our entire community. And if this levy doesn't pass, it will negatively impact our entire community. And I view it as my job to positively impact our entire community. So I'm a yes. Based on the conversation we've had and the deputy mayor not being here, it doesn't look like we have the votes to pass this, unfortunately. So I just want to say to the senior center and NUSA, if you're watching, I'm sorry. I wish we'd been able to support you in your ask to us. City Clerk?
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns?
Abstain.
Mayor Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Alders?
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil?
Abstain.
Councilmember Mankey?
No.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
The motion fails 3-3, I guess. Yeah, we've got 2 abstentions, 1 no, and 3 yeses.
Do the abstentions count as no's in the vote?
No.
Need a plurality?
We'll confer over here. And in council protocols, we keep pointing to our protocols, but they do call things out. The Bothell Protocol Manual says is an abstention for voting. Any member may abstain from voting on any question provided at the time of declaring his or her abstention. He or she shall state the reason. And so I believe, though, we could do a quick confirmation, but I believe that it's a no vote. Not a no vote. It's a not taking a vote.
Basically, did it pass 3-1 in that case? With 2 abstentions?
And 1 absent.
Yeah.
Well, to be clear, my vote is a no. I abstain from the vote. So if you want to clarify, mine is a yes because I abstain, then no. My vote is a no.
Mayor, our clerk and city attorney will confer.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the confusion. Passes 3-2 with Councilmember Zorns abstaining and Deputy Mayor Cabra absent and excused.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I rescind my apology if you're watching, partner orgs. And thank you to our friends from the county for coming up. We really appreciate it. All right. I am going to recess the Bothell City Council meeting and convene the Bothell EMS District meeting for Agenda Bill 23119, pro-con committee appointments for reauthorization of the Bothell Urban Emergency Medical Service District, Snohomish County Regular Property Tax Levy. Are you still the city manager when we're the Bothell EMS district, or are you a different thing?
I don't know who I am.
Okay.
Thank you. Council, again, a few weeks ago, you met and the city clerk walked you through the process of, and I think the fire chief as well walked you through the process of putting a measure before the voters here in the fall. One of the steps in that is to designate a pro-con committee. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to the city clerk to update you on what's taken place and what the next steps are.
Thank you. Yes, so staff advertised for pro-con committees from June 23rd through July 14th. We advertised in the Seattle Times and on the City of Bothell website. We also advertised on various social media outlets, including Facebook and Nextdoor. What we got, we received 2 applications for to serve on the pro committee. That's for Brandon Keith and Keith Allen. We did not receive any applications for the con committee. So council can appoint up to 3 people to serve on either committee. And what we will do is, once you make your appointments, we would notify Snohomish County of our efforts to reach out to members of the con committee. And they have a roster that they can choose to pull from. They may not choose to pull from that. Once you make your committee assignments, I have to submit those names to the Snohomish County by August 1st. And the committee statements are due August 11th, so I'd be reaching out to those members that are appointed if you so choose to appoint them, and we will help them along the way to get their statements filed. And that is all I have. Again, you have two that expressed interest in serving on the pro committee. Happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Alders.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about the agenda bill. It says attachments, the letters of interest, and it says council only. Does that mean that we will be receiving their letters? Because I don't think.
Yep.
Okay, I did not find them in my email.
They were part of the pack when we put it on OneDrive. When you get your packet, you have some council only.
I use the public agenda.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
Usually we put any kind of council only letters of interest or anything that's council only. We put that on OneDrive along with the agenda packet and the projected agenda for the following meeting.
Okay, I will be briefly reviewing those if I can pull them up.
Okay.
You just did. Yes, Councilmember Zorns.
Okay, so while we go looking, I'm going to buy some time here. I saw both of the letters, and I have no complaints about either one of the applicants. So two clarifying questions. One is we could appoint a third person to join them. We have that option.
Right.
Am I right there? Okay.
Yeah, you can appoint up to 3.
Okay, and then we could appoint 3 people. I'm joking that I would just choose people who are sitting out here in the audience for the con, but we could either appoint the con committee or the county could pick them.
They have the option to. They don't have to.
Okay.
So they do have some sort of roster that they have of people that will serve, that are eligible to serve, that live in Snohomish County portion of Bothell. So they could choose that option. We had in the past where we didn't have enough people on either, and they didn't bother. We just had one person in the pamphlet.
That would explain why sometimes you see no con statement was submitted, so.
Correct.
Okay, all right, that clarifies it. Thank you.
Yeah. Councilmember Mankey. Do you have a dance show?
No comments other than the applicants seem to be good ones. I'd be willing to make a motion.
Why don't we give it a minute? We'll just sit here in awkward silence for a few minutes if that's all right.
thank the people who did volunteer. I noticed, Keith seems to be a dominating characteristic.
That's a good point.
It's a pet. Yeah, but to both Keith and Brandon, thank you for stepping up, because there's all kinds of things you could have been doing with your summer, and thank you for caring for Snohomish County and being willing to write this.
I've looked in 3 versions of the agenda and I cannot find these letters.
It's in the council-only docs.
There should be a folder in that says council-only docs. So you have your agenda file.
We've done it. Thank you
Okay.
for this group effort.
Thank you for the guidance.
I guess I have a procedure question. Is it typical to just, since there's 2, there's a max of 3, is it typical to say, hello, the 2 of you, you're both interested, work on this together? Or are we expected to pick?
Yeah,
Okay.
they're expected to work on it together.
Okay.
So what I will do is if they're appointed, I will reach out to both of them tomorrow and let them know, and they can exchange their, email addresses and everything, and they can either come to City Hall, we can walk them through the process, or they can just email me with any questions, but we'll walk them through, but they're expected to work together and write it together.
Gotcha.
If a board member wishes to make a motion, I would happily entertain it.
So moved.
So, what?
Well, what's the motion?
I so
you're making?
move the 2, choosing the 2 applicants. And
Keith Allen and Brandon Keith.
yes, Keith Allen and Brandon Keith as the authors for the written statement that is going to go in the Snohomish County voters pamphlet.
Second.
All right. I believe I heard Councilmember Zorns say that she would like to appoint Keith Allen and Brandon Keith as the pro committee members to prepare statements for the ballot measure and for staff to submit names to Snohomish County elections. I was just reading the thing here. Perfect. Would anybody like to speak to the motions, to the motion? Councilmember Dodd?
I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Board member, thank you, to Mr. Allen and Mr. Keith, because Councilmember Mankey and I were sort of thinking we might have to do it ourselves. So we really appreciate them volunteering.
Yes.
I'll also add that this is actually one of those kind of special roles of participatory democracy, to be able to write the things that we read. There are people behind the words that go into the voter pamphlet statement in support of these levies. And so I'm grateful that there are members of our community who stepped forward to serve, and I'm happy to see their appointment.
City Clerk?
Okay, so I'm going to call the vote. Board Member Zorns.
Yes.
Chair Thompson.
Yes.
Board Member Aldarks.
Yes.
Board Member McNeil, which looks like he left the meeting. Board Member Mankey.
Yes.
Board Member Dodd.
Yes.
Passes 5-0 with Deputy Chair Alcabra absent and excused, and Board Member McNeil absent and excused.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll contact them both.
Board Clerk? I don't know. I'm guessing.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to adjourn the Bothell EMS District meeting and the awkward conversations that go with it. And we are going to break for 12 minutes to allow staff to set up for the study session. It is 7:33. We will be back at 7:45. All right, welcome back. Next up is Agenda Bill 23-120, Imagine Bothell Draft Land Use Methodology. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. We do have 2 study sessions tonight. Both of them are related to comprehensive plan update process, which again, we will be going through the remainder of this year and most of next year. As we bring different elements in sequence tonight, we're going to hear about two. One is land use and one is transportation. We are starting with land use first and the discussion of the land use map. With that, I'm going to turn things over to our Community Development Director, Jason Greenspan, and he's joined by our senior planner, Kirsten Matt, who's I presume doing much of the presentation.
Yes, thank you. Kirsten will be doing the bulk of the presentation this evening. As we have talked with City Council, I think it was last month, about the multimodal level of service and the transportation element, we're now kind of pivoting over back to the land use discussion. I think out of necessity, we needed to start with transportation, given on some timelines we're dealing with. But now Kirsten's going to help lead a discussion about our land use element. There's been some discussions at the Planning Commission thus far. So Kirsten, feel free.
Sure. I also want to mention that we are joined by one of our consultant staff, Andrew Bjorn from Burke. He's an associate principal there, and he has been working with us on developing the map. So tonight we're just seeking feedback mostly on the methodology used for drafting what is the, I guess we'll call it the existing conditions land use map. So to be clear, this is us sort of translating our existing designations to a new concept for how to show land use. It's not the alternatives that we'll be working on as part of the EIS. So just as a quick check-in on our timeline for this year, we are now into Q3 of 2023. The big bulk of the work at this point is working on our engagement and our summer engagement. We had our first Summer Nights booth last Friday. We have our next one this Friday. We're going to be working on affirming the guiding principles as a part of that visioning work with the community, working on identifying our land use alternatives. That's continued on from the last quarter. And then in the fall is the real meat of the project, getting into drafting the elements and starting the work on the environmental impact statement. And that's the preliminary draft EIS, is that rather super long acronym, kind of a long acronym. So an overview of tonight's discussion, I first want to just talk about what is the distinction between a land use designation and a zone, just to help clarify why we're proposing what we're proposing and the intention of those being separate things. We're going to take a look at the existing land use map as well as the existing zoning map, discuss what we consider to be the best practices within planning to our knowledge as professional planners, as well as what was discussed at the staff workshops. We've had 2 staff workshops. That includes both the CD staff as well as the public works staff and our consultant team. We also made sure to include some of the staff from the development services team as well to make sure that they're included in these discussions, because they're the one that will be applying the land use and zoning designations in the development world. And then Andrew's going to take us through the proposed map at the version we have right now and the thought processes that went into developing that. So land use versus zoning. I think at a very kind of high level, land use policy is sort of the guiding and visioning for what goes into the comp plan, and it informs the zoning regulations as the implementation component. So for land use, we would say that they identify a land use range of types, and then the zoning takes that range, and then each zone has its own regulated types of what is permitted or non-permitted. When it comes to the density and intensity, the land use generally will have a number of zones within it that represent a range of densities and intensities, and typically that means dwelling units per acre for residential and FAR for mixed use or commercial spaces. And then the zoning regulations actually are the regulation component that establish what are those minimum and maximum densities permitted for a given zone. And so in that way, land use becomes kind of the qualitative part of this discussion. It sort of looks at the form and the function and the type. There's usually language that's descriptive language about how we envision those different land use designations. And then when it comes to sort of the nitty-gritty of what actually gets developed within the zones within a land use, the zoning is what regulates the height, setbacks, bulk, all of those sort of very specific, site-specific regulations. And then as I alluded to, the land use designations are really supposed to highlight what the intent and purpose is of a designation that gets implemented through the zones. So a good simple example is typical for many jurisdictions will have what's called a low density residential land use designation, and that typically applies to residential only zones with a density of around 1 to 8 dwelling units per acre. So for us, that would represent R9600 through R5400, I excluded R40,000 from this because we're kind of taking a different approach to that designation. So our current land use and zoning maps. This is our current land use map. You can see it's black and white. It is very, very detailed, which is pretty atypical for a standard land use map, although it does also include existing and proposed public facilities, utilities, and open space. That's really the main difference between the current land use map and the current zoning map. So they're pretty much a one-to-one at this point. And as I mentioned, because the zoning map is supposed to be the sort of implementing regulations of the land use designations, this is a little bit unusual. So some of the considerations that we took into account when looking at the existing land use map and maybe some reasons why we want to go in a different direction is that based on the table that I explained about kind of the differences between land uses and zones, our current land use map doesn't really serve the intended purpose of land use designations because it's a one-to-one. There aren't multiple zones within a certain land use designation. It's always one land use designation to the exact zone. And so because of that, as you guys have seen in the last year or so, any request for a rezone also requires a comprehensive plan amendment. And so that creates a little bit of confusion for staff because typically a land use designation will outline the rationale for why a rezone might be approved. And so again, because of the way our system is set up, we have to consider a comp plan amendment every time we consider a rezone. And then in terms of it being black and white, it's kind of difficult to understand visually the sort of patterns within the city of land use, both the extent of certain types of land uses and how they interact with each other. And then it, as I mentioned or alluded to with the discussion on rezoning, it does create a necessary complexity for users and reviewers when looking at the land use map. I also wanted to note some important connections between the land use element and the council vision. Obviously, land use touches on a lot of different things. It touches on economic vitality, it touches on the environment, it touches on how we connect neighborhoods and move between them, and it also is directly related to quality of life as well. So wanting to get into some best practices that are a component of what informed us thinking about the existing conditions map, as well as when we're looking at putting together our land use alternatives, what will go into informing that. So really simple, color. That's sort of a baseline that is really important for us. Following the standard practices for assigning color, typically residential is yellow, commercial is red, usually industrial I think is like blue. And like I said, it helps create this visual guide to land use patterning. It really allows you to get a really easy, quick look at what a jurisdiction looks like in terms of their land uses and that scale and ratio as well. Simplicity. So as with a lot of things, simpler can actually really be better. Limiting the number of designations to the extent that is possible in order to cover all of our zones was a priority for us. We wanted to make sure that the description of those designations is clear and concise and easy to understand. And also really importantly, that the relationship between the land use designations and the zones that implement those designations is really clear. And I've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but wanting to kind of understand the full spectrum of the relationship of all these things. So we have our goals and policies like we have discussed at prior meetings, and those go into informing the land use designations, which then inform the implementing zones. And that's part of the reason that creating that clear basis for rezoning is important. It allows us to really look at the full spectrum of all of the policy level and goal level information that informs what happens on the ground. And that we also need to make sure that we're looking at our land use designations with the growth targets in mind and our future growth, because we do have to think about that in terms of the zoning capacity that we have and need to have. Another really important one that we do sort of have in the existing map, but we're looking at all of this in terms of how we're looking at our existing land uses, but especially the future designations. So there's a lot of important factors that go into thinking about how to create land use designations, where they are and how they're aligned with each other. So we look at proximity to the important things we have in the city, be that schools, jobs, transit, parks and public utilities, different cultural resources. We need to look at what our adjacent jurisdictions are doing as well to make sure that that transition is really seamless. And then we also look at patterning as well. So what does the street connectivity look like? Where do we see uses that are complementary? And also making sure that access to different important things like the cultural resources and parks and schools is equitably distributed. Another important factor is the natural environment. We know we're a city with a lot of wetlands. We're very swampy. We've got a pretty significant landslide area, particularly in the south. Some liquefaction hazard zones. We have some flood zones. And we also have some priority habitat and species areas. We have an animal wildlife corridor through the Fitzgerald. So a lot of that also goes into informing where we want to put more intensive development versus less intensive development where it's appropriate. And then I wanted to touch on some of the discussion points at the staff workshop. You have the notes from the workshop, but I will speak to them at kind of a high level. One of the things we did at the first meeting was just looking at what are the major values that we think are important to shape land use designations within the city, with equity kind of being at the center of all of that because it kind of touches on everything. Resilience was important for us. Functionality, making sure it's a usable document both for the public and for staff. Creating balance within the land uses. And then pluralism was a bit of a wonky word, but we decided to include it because that gets at the importance of understanding that we are one jurisdiction in a region and working together with adjacent jurisdictions and within the framework of our regional governance is really important, particularly, again, when looking at those edges of the city. How do we interact with the land uses in Kenmore and in Woodinville and in the unincorporated areas and all of that. And then we also wanted to highlight from the staff takeaways presentation that Deputy Director Winchell presented to you all last September. Some of the things that we're already doing well, we think, when it comes to the Urban 3 analysis, and the ways that we can continue to leverage the things that we think we're doing well. One of those being we have 2 designated, well, they're not quite designated yet. They are candidate countywide growth centers in downtown and the Snohomish County portion of what is currently Country Village, Red Barn Village. We'll be working on a new name for that at some point. So looking and making sure that we're meeting the thresholds for getting designated as countywide growth centers, that's going to be really important. Leveraging, we have a bunch of things in, I believe it's in the economic development element that focuses on activity centers beyond just the growth centers. We have, I think, neighborhood activity centers, and there's some other words we use, but they haven't, sort of a bit of a half-baked thought that we think we can expand on and do some better neighborhood level planning. And then because we want to pull out a separate implementation element from the plan that we can really make more actionable, that will help us to look at further sub-area planning work we can do in support of connecting neighborhoods. And then creation of a land use map can also help identify patterns and analyze those land uses relative to infrastructure as a part of looking at growth. And in our first and second workshops, we also started to look at what are some of the big moves we see that will be important to us when evaluating future land use alternatives, some of the things that we kind of have to do and some of the things that we think would be important to do. One obvious one with the passing of HB 1110 and 1337 is a transition away from single family as we've kind of known it and having to integrate that into what ends up becoming our land use designations as well as the zones. We also know we have new housing target goal types. We have to address housing type now beyond just available housing units as a part of SB 1220. As I alluded to with the last slide, or 2 slides ago, we're really taking a look at sustainable infrastructure and land use. That's going to be a very important part of this. Looking at our future development needs, where can we minimize costs and impacts and also ensure that we're maintaining climate resilience. Streamlining, we want to make sure that the map is simple, simplify the rezoning process, make it clear to staff how to advise folks on rezoning as well when that comes to us. And again, we want to look at focusing on our centers and sub-areas, reviewing the regional growth center, the countywide growth center requirements, and then taking another look at sort of our neighborhood and activity center policies. Equity and quality of life was another, again, very important topic for us as we were discussing potential moves, big moves when it comes to the land use map. We're wanting to look at improvement of amenities and the equitable distribution of those. And then also considering what the range of different community needs might be. You know, it's not a one size fits all for the entire city. Different communities and neighborhoods within the city have different needs. And then environmental quality, wanting to address where our natural and critical, important natural and critical areas are within the city, and starting to take a look at the importance of sustainable building practices. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew to take us through the proposed land use map. This, as you can see, is our current land use map. And this is our current draft of the existing conditions land use map. So, Andrew, I will pass it to you.
Great. Thanks, Kirsten. Yeah, so this is our current version of the proposed land use map. This is by no means complete. This has been work that we've been coordinating on staff with assembling, but this is an initial run to provide something for you to react to provide something for the public to react to. So if you could move to the next slide. So there are several changes that we've made from the current version. There are 7 main points that we'd like to make with respect to the changes that we've addressed here that really summarize how it's different from the current version. So the first is, if you could go to the next slide. So the first is pretty obvious, and as Kirsten was referencing before, we really wanted to provide a clear, visually distinctive map where the different land use categories can be determined just from looking at it. One of the challenges that we've had with analyzing the initial map is that there are several overlapping designations, and that is very difficult to evaluate. Now, Kirsten's already summarized quite well the reasons to have color. One that I'd like to add in here is with respect to engagement. It is very difficult to go to the public with a black and white map with several letter designations and expect to explain in a very clear and definitive way what the policy intent of the city is. This is a means of providing a simplified policy map that can give a very clear understanding of what the city is intending for the long-term patterns of development of the city to be. One of the other changes that we made is to simplify and remove some of the overlays that are included here. There are a number of them, for example, with motor vehicle sales and senior housing, where those would best be served to be included under zoning. What we have here right now is agriculture. I'll get into that in a minute, but looking at a simplified environmental layer just to indicate those areas where environmental concerns may be at play, and then an affordable housing layer, which we had talked about with staff as being one to include in this. Right now, only the agriculture overlay is included in here. The environmental and affordable housing layers, we wanted to have a bit more discussion about with staff before we had included it in here. So for residential areas, as Kirsten had noted, there is almost a one-to-one relationship between the current land use map and zoning. The biggest change that we've made to this map is to aggregate the residential areas. And this is really intended to provide, again, simple policy direction, but it also acknowledges the changes that have been made as a result of HB 1110. Because most of these areas are now allowed to include more than one residential unit per lot. And then if you include HB 1337, can include up to 2 ADUs. The distinctions that are currently there would need to be changed to address the policy differences now. There are certain areas that are designated as residential conservation where we're acknowledging that environmental limitations will constrain the amount of development that can go into these areas. But overall, we're looking at just aggregating it on the basis of the general intensity of development in residential areas. We've also pulled out manufactured home parks as distinct areas. At present, this is an overlay, but to provide a clear policy direction, our recommendation is to simply include them as their own area, as their own delineated color. What is not included in the current map is a specific designation for public institutional uses. For example, there are a lot of schools that are in the city and in the UGA, which are not called out as separate uses for policy. So this map does include those. It aggregates them in with other uses, for example, municipal buildings such as the City Hall, and UW Bothell is included in that designation as well. With parks and open spaces, there were a number of different categories where the designation could apply. There was a separate designation in Canyon Park, for example. We wanted to aggregate this together and to recognize that there were certain city-owned or publicly owned parks that weren't designated on the current map. So that's been clearly defined here. For employment areas, there was a difference in the designations under the Canyon Park sub-area plan with specific employment uses that we wanted to call out and to use as a way of designating specific areas for employment. So that's under the EM and EL designations. And this is really intended to separate it from some of the mixed use areas that are included in here. So we also want to acknowledge in this map the regional activity centers and ensure that those are clearly defined. So one particular note that we did want to make, the original land use map does have an agricultural designation, and that is a remnant resulting from the Magnolia Dairy being a sending site for the countywide transfer of development rights program. That's important. It should remain in operation. We're not suggesting otherwise. But currently, it also serves an important public space function that we do want to recognize as part of this land use map. So we have included an agriculture overlay, which would ensure that this area is reflective of ongoing agriculture operations, but it does it also ensures that it's recognized as part of the open space system of the city. So there are some additional steps that we'd be looking to include as we're refining this map. We do want to change some of the designations of the residential areas. We're looking to ensure that the city meets its requirements under HB 1220, and as such, there are certain areas where there may be additional density that would be required. We also want this to reflect proximity to transit, proximity to residential amenities. This is going to be an important discussion over the coming weeks and months, but it is one important thing that we do need to acknowledge as part of policy. We also want to acknowledge transit and major transit corridors in this map. That's not always something that's done as part of land use maps that are included in comprehensive plans, but Bothell does include some important transit corridors with with Swift and with Stride. Those are major transit corridors that'll be going through the city that we do want to recognize as influential as part of land use. As mentioned before, environmental areas through the environmental overlay will be important. We also want to recognize as part of this that there may be certain areas that would be expanded as needed. I mentioned before about changes in residential intensity, but there's certainly the potential for the expansion of other areas as well. And then finally, we also want to make sure that this map is aware of what's going on with Snohomish County policy. This does include areas in the UGA where the county is currently managing those areas with its own land use policy. And we do want to reflect what would currently be going on with respect to development in those areas. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Kirsten, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, I also just wanted to make a point, because we are talking about land use and transportation, that we are spending a lot of time making sure that we are looking at the nexus between those two topics. We have had our second now meeting with transit agencies. We have a focus group with them. And the last meeting was really to talk about land use in the context of their existing and future plans. So some of the really important considerations are transit supportive densities. That's how agencies decide where to put routes and what type of routes to put there, depending on the thresholds that there are for both housing and for employment. Looking at connection to all types of routes, not just roads. We're looking at pedestrian connections. We have regional trail, all number of public and private trails throughout the city that are used, as well as our new bike plan. And considering how to access really key land uses, particularly things like their school systems and where our employment hubs are. And so we're just really trying to work with all of the different agencies that are within the city. I think there's 3 or 4, to make sure that we're having those it's sort of a chicken and the egg discussion that we're trying to make sure that we have of, hey, we're looking at maybe putting densities here, where your future routes you're looking at changing, particularly keeping in mind the extension of the Swift line and Bothell BRT line as well. So that's sort of that important connection for when Steve comes to chat with you all. And I think with that, we're going to be opening it up for discussion and questions with you all. I'll bring back up the slide with the map so we can look at it while we're talking.
Thanks so much for putting this together. You have done like a significant amount of work, and I know that a lot of people looked at this and were involved. And so thanks for bringing it to us. Thanks, Andrew. And I think your explanation of like why a land use map needs to be a different thing than a zoning map is really clear, and it makes a lot of sense to me. It's more thematic based rather than specifics, and I appreciate that. I also really want to appreciate that you both acknowledged the wonkiness of pluralism and gave a good explanation for it, because I was wondering. Really appreciate that. I do have some kind of overarching questions, but I know that there'll be more thoughts that come up for me. So when you talked about our vision and goals, one of the things that came up that came out of the Urban 3 presentation and made its way into our vision setting was the idea of neighborhood economic engines. And just the idea that our neighborhoods could be walkable places where people can access basic goods, and have some limited services so they don't have to travel outside of their neighborhood to get necessities, or to hang out with somebody at a corner cafe or something. And so I'm glad that that's reflected in here. But I know that for me, what I hope to see in the future of Bothell is that those neighborhood centers are represented on the map, and that every neighborhood has a little mixed use, low employment kind of area where neighbors can easily access, like through multimodal means. So I'm excited to maybe see that represented in our land use as a way of both achieving the vision, but also creating a higher quality of life for our residents. I'd really love to have a discussion on why we have housing targets, how they are developed, and why Bothell is projected to grow as much as it is projected to grow. I think that you are the professionals who are most qualified to engage in the answers to that. And I think it'd be really beneficial to hear about that. And then I would also really like to better understand this designation of residential conservation. That's unique. And as an extension of that, I have a specific question about an area of preservation that or a couple of areas of preservation that I'm interested in. All right, so you're welcome for the kind of scattering of thoughts, but thank you for taking those on.
Yeah, and I think at some point probably in the fall, we'll have a much more in-depth discussion about the growth targets. But at a really simple explanation, I guess, would be that the Growth Management Act establishes the basis for requiring jurisdictions to have growth targets. Those projections are developed with the Office of Financial Management that then assigns targets to different regional bodies, which for us is Puget Sound Regional Council. Puget Sound Regional Council determines the allocations for the different counties, and then the counties work within themselves to establish targets for the jurisdictions. So because we're a split-level county, we get to do everything twice. So we have a separate target for Snohomish County and a separate target for King County, and that's both for housing units and for jobs. And so part of that is meeting with all of the jurisdictions within those counties to determine a basis for how those will get allocated. And there's usually a methodology put in place in terms of, there's a bunch of different factors that go into it. It comes down sometimes to how many transit stops, how much proportionality there is between the sizes of the jurisdictions. And within the counties, the jurisdictions are divided up separately. So there's usually metro cities, we're within the core cities designation, and then it kind of goes down depending on size of the city. So that's how that all kind of shakes out. This year was a little strange because we got our growth target allocations set up, and then HB 1220 passed. And then we had to determine within the allocations we got how those were going to be separated out by area median income. And unfortunately, some of that is still up in the air with the counties deciding. We have a decent idea of how that's going to look, but nothing firmly set in stone yet. So when we have more firm information, we'll come back and have a more detailed conversation about how that all works.
This is going to be a very simplified, like a very simple question in response to that. Like that was a really good explanation. But even if we took it a step backwards, why is our region projected to grow so much?
That would be a question for the Office of Financial Management, and I'm not entirely sure how they determine those numbers.
Okay.
I think some of it was probably in reaction to the fact that the last go-around we underestimated growth. And so they're trying to make sure that we don't do that again. At least that's part of my understanding.
Jason's looking at me like I kind of want to take this.
Well, also, I mean, we will defer to Office of Financial Management and the demographic analysis they do when it comes to regional growth trends for our economy as well. But to get to your first question about the issue on neighborhood mobility and neighborhood scale mobility, that's something that we've talked about often and how that relates to our climate goals and reducing vehicle miles traveled, and to get to the 15-minute community concept where we're offering opportunities for mobility that don't necessarily rely on single occupancy vehicles. So encouraging destinations where people can do daily trips without necessarily getting in their car or having shorter trips or shared mobility. So I think it'll be a challenge for us to identify many centers at the neighborhood scale, but I think there is an opportunity at the very least to be starting with some of our growth centers that have been identified through the countywide process. And there's nothing that prevents us from identifying further centers throughout the city.
Yeah, and we do have, as I mentioned, I think they're referred to as neighborhood centers and activity centers. They just don't have a lot associated with them, so they were sort of put into place, but then not sort of a fully thought out component of how that would be implemented. So we really want to build off of that as well, since it's already there and it kind of makes some good sense where they are as well. And then on the residential conservation question, so we have two main areas of the city that we consider to be particularly environmentally sensitive. One is down, I think that's that little portion that ekes out as Promontory Point, pretty landslide prone areas. And so that's an area that's been designated R40,000, so that requires a minimum 1 acre lot. And then in the sort of northeastern section, that's the other R40,000 zone, and that's in the Fitzgerald, which has a number of environmental concerns, particularly with groundwater. That's where the animal trail is, and it's full of wetlands and streams. So that was the thought behind that, was we're considering it residential conservation because it's environmentally sensitive, and that's reflected in the existing zoning.
Is the goal of those places to minimize building, or
Yes.
so like, but not conserve it entirely? Like people can live there,
Yes.
just minimally.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the limitation of having it be residential only with a minimum lot size of 40,000 square feet just inherently limits the intensity of what could be developed there.
And then that makes the property owners subject to the quirks of their property, all of the wetlands, all of the
It
everything.
doesn't change anything about what the property owners are subject to. That would be regulated by Title 14, which is our critical areas chapter, and any of the zoning requirements for R40,000.
The last question specifically that I had was to understand the use of what is not known, like there's no name for it. It's just the trees between West Hill and Red Barn. Like it's a wetland area. It's not very well built. It's kind of built up around, and there's more and more new housing that's encroaching on it as development happens. But it's still a very, wet ravine area on the north end of West Hill. And I know that for years I've heard neighbors talking about, well, when is that going to be conserved, or when, what's going to happen with it? Because we're all pretty aware of the challenges of building on it and how that would affect the drainage issues our neighborhoods already experience. So I'd love to better understand why they are designated what they're designated and how we expect that area to develop over time. And is there an opportunity for preservation, like conservation of that land?
So again, because this is a reflection of our existing conditions, the land use designation that we put together would just be a reflection of the existing zoning. So that would be something we would need to look at in terms of both changing the zoning and the land use designation, because the land use designations do need to be consistent with the zoning and vice versa. So that's something we can.
Yeah, and I'm aware of that. I would also like to understand what is the existing designated use of that land now.
I would probably need to get back to you on that,
Okay.
since I would need to zoom in quite far into this map to get that. But we can take a look at that and get you an answer.
Thank you. All right, now I'm in. Go ahead, Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. So thank you for this. I think it makes nothing but sense to map this out the way that other jurisdictions do. We don't need to be confusing on purpose, especially. I'm sure that can happen on accident with land use and zoning well enough. So I really appreciate the explanations about why we would look at land use versus zoning and really what the differences are intended to be. I think that those have not been clear necessarily historically. This is similar to what you said. So I guess I have two things really. The first is thinking about places we want to conserve, like the Shelton View Forest. That's something that's in our vision. That's something that's brought up by residents quite consistently. I would love to see some green around it right now so that we don't have it zoned for residential, because it's one of our last remaining big chunks of forest, right? So just kind of understanding if we can't do that, why exactly, or how we express that more formally to get that in the land use vision. And then the other thing is when we talk about meeting growth targets at AMI and having neighborhoods with convenience stores. So I was lucky to grow up in Queensboro, could walk to Sid's. It was a bit of a jaunt, but and I can still walk there now from where I'm at in Shelton View when it reopens. And it was a convenience. It was before I could drive, you know, I could bike there, I could walk there as a kid, right? And now we have, because of our transportation package last session, we have free buses for all youth. It's amazing, right? It's a big open thing. You can just get on the bus and go. So I would love to see along arterials where we're likely to see transit, more of the medium residential, so that one, we can have some medium density that's not along a highway or a freeway, because that really does put people who are paying less for housing along very polluted corridors. So I don't think that that's a big equity win. But also that's a natural place where I'd love to see within the medium density corner stores or something equivalent where we can see those spring up naturally. I'm personally a big fan of letting people take risks and giving people room to fail. So I think if someone says, okay, I have this corner lot and I want to build my own SIDS, I'm going to call it, you know, Chuck's or Nancy's or whatever it is. Let them try it. Like, I would like to just see a little bit more openness. And like I said, along arterials where we're likely to see buses or we have them today. So that's kind of my thought is, and maybe some of that is stuff that will develop as we get further into it, but more of the medium along arterials to help encourage more, more types of housing. Again, not just in the high density zones that are focused on highways and freeways, but also I would just love to see more opportunities for corner stores or even live workplaces where, you know, I'm going to make up businesses, right? But like a hair salon or a coffee shop. Like I would love most of Bothell to have the opportunity to walk somewhere and recreate and gather and meet their neighbors hyper locally. And those are my two things. Thank you.
I guess I'll go, and thankfully I'll probably forget an item or two, skip over it. And I'm trying so hard not to do the transportation leap because I keep thinking things I'm like, no, that's coming up next. But just briefly on transportation, we really are at the mercy of mass transit, who can change their bus routes at whim. And so the more that we put our planning around not just transit, but like where we've got bike lanes going in, I would think bikes are going to live longer than buses, and that's more under individual control. So there's that piece of not just being transit oriented, because I keep thinking about bus routes that go away or, you know, change, and now you've built something, and how are these people going to move if now the bus is much less convenient? So anyway, enough segueing there. I really kind of like the current map, so I hope it doesn't go away forever, like it's somewhere as a resource. I have in my binder here, where are they? Oh, I have pictures of the landslide prone areas and the erosive soils. I love the maps, and there's things that I love about this as well. So that I need a page to put that in. I do want to know, be clear that this is not changing the zoning. It's just giving a visual. If someone says, I want to have a hair salon near multifamily, where's all your multifamily in the city? This map would be that tool for that. Am I correct?
Yeah, it establishes sort of the umbrellas within which certain zones are nested. So I believe for this map, for example, for residential low, that's basically every single-family residential designation, I guess everyone, from 9,600 to 5,400 detached, except for R40,000, which is in conservation. So this really gives you an idea of where are the residential-only areas, where are the sort of lower to medium residential areas, where are the areas where there's a mix of zones, so you can have residential, maybe commercial, maybe some neighborhood business. And then where are the areas that are just for employment, whether that be somewhere in Canyon Park or part of North Creek, where are the areas where there's the institutional uses, where are all the schools? So just kind of a higher level look at the mixes of things.
And a visual where they could go dive deeper and find out the specifics of where those particular.
Yeah, so one thing that would pair with this would be a table that shows you for every land use designation, what are the corresponding zones?
Okay,
And then you
perfect.
can know, okay, let me go look in that area and see what are
Okay.
how does the zones shake out in terms of that area.
Okay, and I was looking through my agenda packet here and I can't find it now. Somewhere I saw some zoning changes, our residential zoning changes. Was that in this agenda bill or
We have-
somewhere else that just
Not
got-
that comes to mind. We
Okay.
haven't started thinking about zoning changes.
Okay,
Based
perfect.
on the targets and the requirements of HB 1220, it's pretty likely that there will have to be zoning changes, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay, perfect. So I don't know where I picked that up and I won't embed that in here. I would love to get the slides on this if,
Sure.
something to do during the August break. And then another thing that occurred to me, you were talking about having 15-minute accessibility to things. And I thought, from raising my own children and now in a different season in my life and different reasons why things aren't 15 minutes away, it might be worth asking, in your booth, if you have like a clipboard where you could say, what are the reasons that you have to drive 15 minutes? I drove Bellevue and Edmonds for years, getting my daughter to and from ballet every stinking day. And I know there's soccer moms and lacrosse dads, and it might be nice to know what pulls people more than 15 minutes away from their home. Again, that's transportation, isn't it? All right, I'll just skip that. Okay, so.
But it's related.
Is it related? Okay. And then, I have a question. Underneath key values, you did the equity, resilience, pluralism, functionality, balance. And I was going to ask you how you define balance.
I'm trying to think back from the workshop. I would maybe need to look at the workshop notes, but I think we were talking about balancing the types of uses, balancing where things are located. Like
Okay,
Andrew would like to
okay.
chime in.
Okay. So those are things sorry, Andrew.
Kirsten, that's right on the money. I
Okay.
just wanted to make sure that you got that. Yeah.
Uses,
all good.
location. Okay, that helps me understand it. And so you're talking about things that you can actually measure on this. These different values. If you had to measure, you could. Okay. And then the other thing is I really appreciated seeing staff comments here. And it's the bossy firstborn in me coming out, so I want to apologize. But I had a couple calls from constituents that were this last week where they felt they'd been marginalized. And these are phrases there was one phrase that I picked up here, and I don't know that it's intentionally marginalizing people, but there are quick ways to shut down the conversation. So can I say some of these phrases that have been reflected? Because I think what it does is it shows a lack of empathy, and to the person who's supposed to be receiving it, it comes across as it's my way or highway. And I'm not saying that this is in this agenda bill, but I saw one comment and I got feedback from some constituents on this. One is the phrase NIMBY. That shuts the conversation down real fast. Afraid of change is another thing that just shuts conversation down because people get real defensive of, I'm not afraid of change. There's just things that I value and I want you to hear me. Are you racist? You're not welcoming new neighbors, and it puts people on the defensive. So if one wants to put people on the defensive, use those phrases. But if one doesn't want to put people on defensive, maybe ask questions instead of putting labels on people real fast. And that's just generally throwing that out there for folks to consider, not you guys specifically. So thank you for graciously allowing me to put that out there. And that's, I think you answered my questions. If we get the slides, that'll be great. Thank you.
Sure.
First question I have is a clarifying question. During the first segment of the presentation, you mentioned zoning code changes would be different with a map like this. They wouldn't have to go to the comprehensive plan update. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how that works?
Yeah, so it can vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction what that process exactly looks like. But typically, the goal of the land use designations is to create this sort of visioning framework of what could potentially be in an area with those corresponding zones. So that would mean there's the potential for someone to request a potential zoning change from that sort of menu of options. That said, the land use designation would make it really clear sort of how we would go about potentially approving that. And usually that would go through the hearing examiner rather than going to a full comprehensive plan amendment. So the hearing examiner would have this sort of clear set of reasons as to why there would be a rational basis for approving a rezone request, and that would be something that is typical for all other sort of type 3 reviews that staff does. They would put together, they would do their evaluation, they would take a look at the comprehensive plan as well as all parts of it, but specifically the designations and some of the goals and policies in the land use element, and then they would put together a recommendation to the hearing examiner, whether that be for an approval or a denial of the request.
Okay, so that could theoretically cause, I guess my question is more around like, is the original process that we're following now versus the proposed potential changes here, was that a feature of the process or is it a bug? Like, are we trying to fix that problem because it's causing issues, or was that original process set up that way for a specific reason to prevent changes that were not intended to occur? I don't know if that's easy to answer a question or not, but just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I don't know that I could maybe speak to the original intent of why that was set up, but I will say it does create confusion for staff when even trying to advise an applicant or even counsel about why to approve a rezone, because every rezone is also a comp plan amendment. So you wouldn't really have laid out a basis for approving a rezone, because then you have to go back to the sort of square one of, well, what do we think about the comp plan designation? And so that begets a much larger discussion.
So does the comp plan designation for each sub area go away then at that point? Like, how does this flow into that, and how do they work together?
So the land use designation, again, is associated with a number of zones. And so let's say someone has a collection of parcels and a kind of significant chunk of area that's let's say it's R 7200, but maybe it's adjacent to some more intensive uses, and it might be appropriate for them to request a slightly more dense designation. Then they would apply for the rezone with their basis and rationale based on the goals and policies, and then also would, however, we draft the requirements for how we would approve a rezone, and then they provide us that rationale as to how we would do that.
And to just tag on to that, if those are in the same land use category, the same land use designation, it would not also be a comprehensive plan amendment. It would be a rezoning that would go to a hearing examiner. It wouldn't necessarily trigger a comp plan amendment every time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's what we're seeing now.
Okay. I think there's positives and negatives from that. A hearing examiner, is there an open public process for that? Is there a notice that's done and people can come and speak and give their thoughts on it?
Yes.
Okay.
So our current process for what we call our type 3 permits all go to a hearing examiner. So that requires the noticing of the project itself. Those typically also require a SEPA review, which has its own noticing period. It also requires a notice of public hearing. There's a period within which people can review all the materials for the public hearing and provide comment prior to the hearing. It's also a full public hearing. We now do those. I think they're all over Zoom. We haven't had a request for a hybrid one, but we haven't had that many recently. And then there's a public comment period during that as well.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure there's still that public interaction piece to any kind of changes that are being made. I think that's really important to maintain. I think the next question I had was for Andrew. You made a statement about HB 1110 and 1337 updates to this based on that. With those updates then, since you could have two attached or detached dwelling units on your property, would that turn all of the light orange to the darker orange color automatically?
So this is an interesting question because 1110 doesn't change the minimum lot sizes. All it includes is what how many units could be included on a site. So you can make the argument that that what is there might be colored in a darker orange. However, in a lot of cases, you can't get another unit on a site. They've developed it out. It's not going to fit any of the other development requirements that may be in an area. It may just be taking up too much of the lot to put in another house. So where we're trying to make an important distinction here is that this is reflective of the current zoning. The current zoning is going to allow more development regardless of how this map changes. We do want to have what we have here reflect the current policy and the current regulations going forward, which would incorporate that. But one way or another, you could allow for additional density everywhere. So that's a long way of saying that you could probably, if this were the current map, you could make the statement that there are a lot of areas that could be darker, but this is intended more as a concept of what the land use would be going forward and not necessarily what things are under current zoning.
Okay.
I don't know if that quite answered the question here, but I think that it's important to note just that we're in a changing environment in terms of development regulations because of the state requirements.
Sure, that makes sense. You had made a comment about somebody being able to come look at this and see what the future would look like or what's possible in the future based on those designations. So I was just trying to understand how HB 1110 and 1337 would change that. To your point, some lots are so built out that you couldn't, place another ADU on it. Some are not, and you could place two. So I'm just curious what that looks like. I think the point of being able to see a map and see what's possible in the future is where people want to see. They want to see where things are now, but also in the future, what are we expecting?
Yeah, I hate to throw another monkey wrench into this, but the requirements under 1220 also allocate specific growth targets and housing targets based on income level. And the interpretation of that is to require certain types of housing on the basis of income level, that single unit housing versus multi-unit housing has different implications for affordability. So that's also something that we're going to need to consider, that long-term compliance with those requirements over the next 6 years, over the next 20 years will be important. So there are a number of different state requirements that we're looking to ensure that we fulfill as a result of these designations and the assumptions behind them and the expected zoning that would come out of them in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's helpful information. I had a question about the impact that this is going to have on the school district. I know we can't know where the higher density areas are for sure going to be and when they're going to show up, but are we planning to share this with them as well so they can understand where we're planning for growth so that they can then acquire property sooner rather than later and pay a lower cost, plan for how they're going to move students and redistricting, those types of things that typically come up much, much later when it's, it's going to come back to all of the residents of Bothell in the form of taxes or more levies, things like that. But if they can get ahead of it, that could eventually save us money as well. So I'm just curious how that interplay works.
Yeah, and we've already started having discussions with the school district about just getting going on talking about the comp plan, just period. And so we do plan on working with them as a really important stakeholder in determining where it might be important to add different types of land uses adjacent to schools, and how the schools also interplay with the transportation system and improvement. So that is definitely going to be a very important group of people to talk to.
Okay, great. They can also build, if they can build close to a higher density area, that's less bus service for them, more walking for kids, better infrastructure around the school and around the housing for everybody to use, so.
And that definitely came up in our discussions at the staff workshops, is making sure that we are planning for density around things like school areas, and providing a range of different housing types for families living adjacent to schools is something that's important to us.
Great. I think my last item is just a comment. Reading through the workshop information, I looked at it with a lens of, what happened during the workshop, what was the feedback that was given. But if someone were to just be scrolling through and not looking at it from that perspective, I think there's some things that were, some feedback that was given in there, as it should be. We're asking for opinions of staff and things like that, but there were some things around single-family housing. One of the big moves items was transition away from single-family and infill. And there was another comment about single-family development is no longer going to be the most predominant land use in the future. I don't think we can know that for sure. I know it's an opinion that was put out there, but I don't know that that's the case for sure in the future. So that could raise alarm bells for folks that are not following along, or they're just jumping in and out of packets as we go and not seeing everything. Also, there were some comments about no more single-family development in multifamily zones, which makes sense, right? We call it multifamily, but we do allow single-family homes to be built there. We could just be closing a gap there, which we didn't intend to build single-family homes, but it also looks like we're saying on one side, like, hey, we want middle housing, we want these other development types, we want to allow more flexibility, but on the other side, we're saying, okay, but we're also going to close off flexibility in some other areas, and that could look like we're saying one thing in one place and doing another in another. So just wanted to call that out as something we need to be careful about. And again, I think it's great to get feedback from everybody, and as long as we're saying, and I think putting it out there in a way that people understand that this is just like, this was a brainstorming session. These were ideas. We're talking about making big moves, but not necessarily everything in these feedback sessions are going to be actioned or are looked at in the same way by everybody. So I appreciate seeing the feedback and seeing the direction and what people are thinking and the ideas that are being generated. I think that's incredibly helpful when you're trying to make changes and make decisions, and I'm thankful that it's there for us to see.
That felt very awkward. I really appreciate the focus on simplicity. I feel like if that were a puzzle, it would be like for ages 8 and up, and if our current one was a puzzle, it would be for ages 12 and up. So we've gotten it a little better. I very much like having flexibility for us to control our own zoning rather than have to wait for when the state says it's okay to do it. And also the way we have it set up doesn't really seem like it's accomplishing the intent of how land use and zoning were supposed to interact. So I appreciate the way that we're looking at this. Do we have to designate land use for the urban growth area, or was that just for visualization?
I believe we do,
Okay.
probably as a part of annexation requirements.
Okay. I'm going to have a combination of like comments and questions. And I just want to like kind of back up what Councilmember Aldrich said earlier. I really like the idea of designing for proximity, where people can get the things that they need on a day-to-day basis, covering as little ground as possible. We say vehicle miles traveled. I like to call it traffic. I want to reduce traffic. And I think most people want to reduce traffic. And if we can have people drive fewer miles for the trips they do take, or take fewer trips just for in their vehicle, like either one of those is a win in our land use code. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to bring this up or not, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'd love to see small commercial units like garage businesses, accessory commercial units legalized citywide as part of this comp plan update. And kind of one step beyond that, would also agree with Councilmember Aldrich about neighborhood centers, and I'd be really curious kind of where we could place some of those, where we could have I know there are places around with, small commercial areas that aren't shown up as multi-use or mixed use on there, And I'd love to know how we could, if anything, expand those and give more opportunities for people just be able to have cool amenities close by their home. Love the staff suggestion for residential conservation designation in the R40,000 zones. I mean, we've been building new subdivisions for a long time. If we keep doing the same things we've always done, we are not going to make progress that the community expects us to make. Oh, the only thing really missing from the major values, I felt that climate was mentioned less than it could be. I think there's a climate piece to resilience, but I would like to also reduce our overall contribution to the problem with a built environment that results in fewer lifetime greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that would be a noble goal. Land use around schools. This is something you said, and I don't know if this is something we're going to look at through zoning or land use or not, but, you know, when my parents went to school, like, you know, over half of kids walk to school, and now it's around 10% for my kids. And like in 2 generations, we've basically killed walking to school. I would like to make that a thing again. So I don't know if there's a way to have a land use or a zoning designation that has some kind of unit bonus for, you know, family-sized units, like smaller 2-3 bedroom units within a half mile of schools, something like that. I would love to see something like that just to make it feasible for my kids' kids to walk to school. Are people able to build restaurants in the employment zones, like a lunch spot?
I mean, like in North Creek or Canyon Park?
Yeah.
Or, yes, I believe the zoning does.
It depends. I would have to look at Title 12, because I think it depends. Oh, sorry, I can repeat myself. I would need to look at the zoning map, but in terms of, let's say, the employment medium, there may be zones within there that do, and there may be zones that don't, but I would have to look. Yeah, I can get back to you on that if you want.
I don't know if anybody's going to be building lunch spots in office parks anytime soon, but
I know Canyon Park has a couple.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking about, is I know that there are a few that exist, and the mixed-use zoning there, I think, sets the basis for that, so that we could consider that with the rezonings and the zoning actions that the city would take with the update.
Perfect.
There's a lot of parts of North Creek that almost have kind of every commercial zone, as well as the RAC designation, which is our highest density residential designation. Just kind of depends where in the park.
Okay, awesome.
Can I just add that when Councilmember Dodd and I were on Planning Commission, we were involved in the Canyon Park sub-area plan, and I know that specifically the plan was to have like lunch spots and restaurants mixed in with. So cool. I know that at least in Canyon Park that your question could be answered that way, yes.
That's probably a zoning conversation, though, not a land use
Canyon
designation.
Park's a little bit different, too. And one of the things that I actually didn't mention, that one of the goals that we had with this is recognizing that we basically have 3 zoning codes right now, 2 of which are sort of a form-based hybrid code that places less emphasis on regulating the use types and more emphasis on the building forms and how the building forms influence natural uses that are naturally paired with those building forms. So we also wanted to create some consistency throughout the city of the land uses not being so starkly different between our 2 sub-areas with separate zoning code and then our citywide code that's more of a traditional Euclidean code that's really emphasizing use over form and function.
I'm going to sneak in super quick and then I'll another point on like restaurants, especially in employment zones. If we get people to not drive to work, but then they can't eat out if they forget their lunch or anything, then they're gonna be like, well, that sucked, I'm not gonna do that again. So if we can have amenities, like I remember needing like being pregnant with my son at my office in downtown Seattle and needing heartburn medication and having to like find a pharmacy because it was like a weird part of Seattle where there wasn't a lot of stuff around, like, and it was just a ridiculous problem. So the more we can encourage little convenience stores for employees who are coming here, like if they're gonna, do what we ask and drive less, like let's give them heartburn medicine or sandwiches or whatever it is.
So did I hear you say, so we've got, form-based codes on top of Euclidean zoning, and then we've got the 2 different sub-areas and the citywide. Did I hear you say we're moving away from form-based to a more traditional Euclidean? And
No, I was just mentioning that in Canyon Park and downtown, we have it's considered a hybrid code because it's not entirely form-based. Most cities don't have fully form-based codes because there's still some regulation of uses, so we just consider those hybrid. And then the citywide code is that more traditional Euclidean zoning.
Okay, perfect. As long as we're not moving away from form-based codes, because I'd rather push more in that direction. Let's see, I said that in terms of neighborhood centers. Yeah, I would just love for anybody in every neighborhood to be able to walk to a corner store if they want to get a dozen eggs. Like, I think that's cool. I'd like to zone for that. Or land use for that.
And I think that'll be part of our challenge. And when you look at the sea of yellow on our land use map, where can we identify when we come back with our proposed changes? Where are those opportunity sites? Yeah. Are they linked in with our transportation element and where it makes the most sense, but not necessarily on major arterials, for example? So that's the challenge that we're taking seriously.
And it may not be possible in every zone in the city right now. Like, it may not be possible in every neighborhood, but where it is, it would be nice if we had a little place. Like, I know up on Nike Hill, there's a couple little small retail areas right up around there, and if there was a way we could build, some sort of neighborhood center around those that already exist, like, that'd be real neat. And then, in the larger seas of yellow, it might not be totally possible, but like, let's do what we can. All right, that's all I got.
Can I just echo Councilmember Menke about the plan density around schools with planning for housing types so that we can be more inclusive and welcoming to families, especially who are starting out and who may have, be in the midst of raising kids, but also at the beginning of their career on lower incomes. And so I was really glad to hear that. And I think I sort of heard it in what the mayor was saying as well. But I just wanted, to reemphasize that, like, I too am on board with that vision.
And I forgot to shout out Councilmember Mankey, but I appreciated it when he brought it up too.
I'm going to shout out Councilmember Mankey too. It's Ben Day. So I wanted to, when you had spoken about single family zoning and just making sure that we're saying what we mean and meaning what we say. I think being able to tell the story that single family zoning it's never meant only one family's going to live here and we're going to make sure that happens. It's just been there's one unit on that lot, and now under state law, everybody gets a maximum of two. I know we talked about that recently, but I think just people understanding that we're not ending that type of housing. People have choices with their lots, and also just explaining that it has been more of a marketing term than like a firm limit on the number of families in a house. Like, I think just helping people understand and digest what is changing versus what is maybe sounds scary, but like no one is going to come to your house and put a wall and a second kitchen in. So really just being able to tell that story, I think that helps really. And to Councilmember Zorns' point, people don't like being told that they're afraid of change. And at the same time, without having all of the educational tools available, you can show up and sound like you're afraid of change because you don't know what the change is, right? It hasn't been articulated to you in a way that you've digested. So really just balancing how we tell these stories. And I think that our staff has done a great job of that so far. And I just wanted to shout that out and really make sure that we're constantly providing facts and just like you said, a puzzle that an 8-year-old could do. Like, we have to explain things in terms that people understand. Not everybody is a zoning nerd, unlike I would say most of the people at this table at this point. So we really just have to be able to speak language that people can digest, and then make sure we get down to, okay, there's a change, you don't like it, let's talk about it. What does it mean? What don't you like? How can we pivot and make sure that we kind of serve everybody, right? Because you're not going to make everybody happy, but you can probably make most people happy. And I think a lot of times when I sit down and talk with constituents who are upset, some of it is just they heard from someone who heard from someone who heard from someone. And if you sit and go over what is actually on the table, they're like, oh, that's not a big deal. Like, that's happened in our council office with me when I've met with people. So it's really fascinating. So the more we can do that, I think the easier these conversations are, and the better we can have discussions that aren't like, you don't like it, I like it, now we're in disagreement. It's more like, oh, okay, sounds great. Sounds Bothell-y.
I can just jump in here. right? This is a combo. Yes, to just kind of elaborate on your observations, which are fantastic. People do come because they feel very threatened, and it is good to allow them to say what they're concerned about. And then it's also really good to, they may not have gone through the process. They may be like me who thinks out loud to get to, how I call what's really salient. But it's really good to have those conversations of listening to someone, finding out what's most important to them and respecting that and accommodating that, but having built a relationship where they can find places to give as well. But it's not heavy-handed and one-sided, my way or the highway. They have an opportunity to say what's the most important piece, and then it's our responsibility to respect that and figure out how we can give that important piece its due. Unless the city is burning down, and then that's where we have to override that opinion. But otherwise, respecting those things that are most core to people is very, very important. But allaying fears and digesting how are we going to make this work out is a really important thing for us to do.
I would also ask staff how the city is addressing misinformation that can sometimes fuel some of these conflicts, and the discomfort that some people are experiencing around what is being proposed. Because we know that misinformation is a hazard of especially social media, and that is occurring within our community, and it often does fuel disagreements that get in the way of neighborliness. And so I just want to raise that as a concern that we are seeing within our community, and look to the city for some remedies to that.
Yeah, I can speak a little on some of the things we're currently doing to do our best to try and kind of nip some of that in the bud where we can. Obviously, there's only so much we can do to try to ensure everyone has the amount of information that they need to understand some of this stuff, because it does get really complicated. It's complicated for us too, even as professional staff. We do have an Engage Bothell website now that's really dedicated to the comp plan at this point. We've put together some flyers that link to that website that we're providing at all our events. We'll have them in the city hall as well. We have some information on that site too about what is comprehensive planning, kind of a little bit of a 101 on this is what all this means. And that's also part of the engagement too. People can ask us questions. We can have those discussions, gathering those values and important things that people have. I know that happened last Friday. We pivoted a little bit. Our consultant staff that was out there because folks had comments and questions they wanted to provide that didn't fit into the activities we'd prepared. So we're like, all right, well, let's pivot and make sure we're just collecting all the information from people. So that really is an avenue for people to ask questions. I'm always available to answer questions from anybody. All my information's out there on everything. But we're really hoping to utilize as many different avenues as we can as part of our engagement process to provide that information for folks. And we are right now looking at figuring out where we want to host our fall forum. We're looking somewhere in Snohomish County. We want to focus in the north end of the city. That'll be sometime in October, so we'll give more information as we're getting closer. And that'll be, I think, a really helpful resource as well for talking to the community and answering questions.
I kind of want to sneak in on that. It's hard to find a good option in Snohomish County to host a large gathering. I totally respect that. I just want to make sure that we're picking a place that's open to our entire community. There have been events hosted at places that don't welcome, for example, members of the LGBTQ community or whatever it is. So I would hope for maybe a school or just some other, building that is open to all, clearly and blatantly.
Yeah, right now we've reached out to the school district because we see that as probably the best option. I think up by Skyview, just because it's a really big facility. There's a lot of parking, easy to, it's accessible to the city. And like you said, it's open for everyone that would want to come.
I just wanted to jump in and lend support to the ideas that were thrown out about the corner stores. I think if we can figure out where those places are, that would be great to look at. As a Councilmember Daw was talking about her childhood, I was thinking about mine as well. And while I was not at the top of the hill where she was, I was on Lower Nike Hill, and I also went out frequently and went to the store that was nearby. So I think it's just a good opportunity in general for everybody to be able to run and get something you need, or let your kids out on the rope a little bit to go out and do something independently. And, you know, they can spend their money too, and they can learn about money, and they can help a business thrive as well. So it's not just about parents getting things, it's about, you know, teaching kids life and supporting businesses as well. So I'm definitely for that.
I was just thinking about that because where we lived at near 4th and 216th, going to SIDS and back, my parents knew people from Girl Scouts or sports or whatever well along all the routes. So you let your kids go out and have independence. But if they misbehave, there's a lot of people around that can tell your parents about it. So it's a great community builder.
I've got one quick question that I forgot about. We have 5 different downtown land use designations. And I totally understand the idea behind a transition zone. I don't necessarily understand like the transition zone to the transition zone. Like, and I guess, can you speak a little bit in terms of like why we need so many land use designations for downtown?
Yeah, and I think Andrew might be able to answer this a little bit better than I am, but part of this is not wanting to change too much about downtown because it is very specific to the sub-area plan. So trying to respect that that is an existing sub-area plan, and any significant changes really would need to go through a more significant process, just to respect the very lengthy process that went into developing that. I know we got similar feedback from Planning Commission, and we have started to have some discussions about, is there room for further aggregation of those designations? And I'm sure Andrew has been thinking a little bit more about that since Planning Commission, so I'm gonna let him maybe speak on that a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that what Kirsten said is on point. There may be some level of consolidation with respect to the Sunrise Valley View area that's included in here. Again, not to change what the general intent is right now, but more to just recognize that it can be folded into some of the other designations without losing the policy intent. But generally, the core gateway, neighborhood, and transition areas have somewhat different functions within the downtown, such that we wanted to recognize that. And looking at the gateway, it's more to preserve the gateway into the downtown and ensure that there's kind of a nice entryway into the core of the city. I don't want to go through all of them per se, but essentially we just want to maintain the current vision that's in the downtown. It may be over the process of consultation and discussion that we look to consolidate this further, but this seemed like it was a good starting point for the discussion.
Okay. If so we're doing the comp plan right now, and there's a different sub-area plan for that. Is there a time when that sub-area plan will come up for review outside of the comp plan?
That is something we've talked about, particularly with the discussion around Main Street and needing to take a look at circulation, as well as the city-owned properties, wanting to take a holistic view at what might be the best option for those. So, and I think in general, what we've heard from you folks is, wanting to take more of a look on a sub-area level. So those would be projects we could identify through the comprehensive plan to do once we're done with this process. As to, it's been a while since we've adopted the sub-area plan for downtown. Is there an opportunity to take another look at it at a future date?
So are we kind of, respecting the sub-area plan because we're supposed to by statute, or because we've just decided we don't want to address it in the comp plan?
Probably scope.
Okay.
It's just that would be a much larger discussion to be had, and we just, quite frankly, don't really have the capacity through the comp plan process right now.
Okay.
And this is also shortly before your time, but the whole downtown sub-area planning hit and before your time here, heavy discussion within the last 10, 15 years. So it's pretty recent that downtown Savaria has been talked and hashed and rehashed.
This may be a slight change of topic, but one of the questions that I wrote down through the course of the discussion, and this one might be for you, Andrew, but it really is related to kind of implementation processes and procedures here in the city. But when we're talking about implementing 1220, what is that implementation process going to look like? And the way we're doing this now, is that setting us up for having to do comp plan amendments in order to adopt and implement that legislation?
So the real meat and potatoes of HB 1220 is going to come down to not just the land use designations, but also how we look at our zones. So the way that Department of Commerce has let us know how to show compliance with HB 1220 really comes down to housing type and the affordability levels that housing type is supportive of. So typically for lower AMI, that's going to be more of a multifamily type building. So it's kind of a new way for us to even look at how we think about zoning and showing compliance with growth, because it isn't just the housing units themselves, it's what type are they. So that's something we have to take into consideration as part of the zoning code changes that go along with the land use changes.
It is really hard to explain because, for example, in King County, if we have a growth target of 5,800 households and the gap that we know in terms of affordability in the income bands is more in the 0 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 80, but the zoning in King County is primarily single family, that was going to require us to revisit how we're regulating land use, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think I'm more thinking like, how is it going to be showing up on our agendas, and like, the process of going through Planning Commission, and because we've seen how our current policies are working, where to do something with the downtown transition zone, we're having to make a comp plan amendment. And what I hear you saying is that there's a hope that it won't be so tied in going forward. Yeah. That's why I didn't speak up earlier. And so because it is so tied in, we're having significant challenges in making that implementation of new code amendments. And so I'm just thinking, how will these changes to the land use map and what you're considering help us better implement 1220 when that comes, and what would that process look like?
So we have to implement 1220 as a part of the update because it affects our growth targets. So in order to show compliance with our growth targets, we have to implement the requirements in HB 1220. It was an amendment to the MPP, the planning policies for the region and for the counties. So we're having to do that as a part of this work.
So you mean the update to the comp plan?
Yes, and the zones. Okay. Yeah.
Do you have enough information to make those updates in this comp plan?
Well, we're going to have to.
Okay.
I wanted to circle back to downtown and Canyon Park, honestly. I think, we can't crack open our plans way too often because it's a bad use of resources. It's not like we're looking for work to do as community development. You guys have plenty to be getting on with. And when we make a plan, it has to stand for a while and get built out. Otherwise, why did we even make the plan, right? So I think that those are all valid. If we were to go reopen Canyon Park now, having just worked on it in the last, within the last few years, I'd be like, what are we doing? I also think when we work on these plans and we target a specific sub area, we need to be able to tell our residents in those areas and our business owners and everybody who's invested in that how long this is for. Okay, we're making a plan. This is gonna settle in for about 10 years, and then we're gonna revisit, see how it's going, see if we need changes. So I don't think that any sub area should sit unchanged for a long time either. So I really want to be clear And I don't need an answer now, but like how often we revisit these sub-area plans, make sure that's on the schedule, make sure we don't think, oh crap, it's been 15 years, how's that going, you know? So if, as we tackle sub-areas outside of the comprehensive planning process, really just make sure that we have reviews scheduled and that we also don't give people whiplash if they think, okay, we just did this 5 years ago, why are we doing it again? You know, I thought we had more time. Because I think, I'm saying 10 years because comp plans, right? But as we look at just the reality of who's doing this policy setting, every 8 years, we could have completely different city councils. So having documentation that folks like myself, or I'm not going to point out everybody who wasn't here the last comp plan, but, or the last downtown sub-area plan, like people, things that we can refer to just catch up on the process, so that when we do go look at those, or we talk about why is it this way, why is it that way, we should be able to just study and find those answers. And we don't want you guys have to re-explain it every time. But we also, you know, we have to have that story available to us, so that we can also answer questions of constituents. So I do want to just say, I totally understand not doing downtown or Canyon Park right now. I do want to make sure that we have sort of regular cadences on those as we go forward.
Are you saying like a little backstory history on the different sub areas?
Yeah.
Just have that.
No, and I think that makes a lot of sense, because people, it is not the clearest thing to go back through old agendas and find stuff out. I have done it. I have done it for fun and to be right on the internet, and it is not great. So a summary would be awesome.
I think in regards to downtown too, we are, it's Kirsten mentioned, we're having some conversations too around what does that look like in relationship to, there's other discussions that we're having in downtown. And I've talked to some of you individually about this, and again, we'll be discussing more formally here in the fall, but there are some pretty specific decisions that are going to be coming up on council agendas over the next year or two related to specific sites within downtown. And I think before we dive into like specific individual projects or discrete places, that we do want to zoom out and look at the downtown plan, not in a standpoint of because it's chiseled in stone or makes it so that it, but to inform and to remember of like what were the intents were and that sort of thing, to again have the broader conversation around, so where are we starting from? And again, starting points are always just that. So we will have more conversation. I think this has been very helpful to help inform as we think about what this would look like. And I think there's some interest, and I think that validates that even something like a walking tour of downtown to talk about it and actually point at things and not just look at pictures would be potentially helpful. So we'll continue to explore that and bringing something back soon.
To this point, I am actually curious about how the sub areas are kind of folded into comp plans, and is there any process to make sure that the sub area is in alignment with the comp plan? Like, I think that there's like a touch that needs to happen. I'm not saying dig into it, open it up, tear it apart, you know, and re-sew the whole thing. Like, figure out how they're aligning with one another, where the rough edges might be. And then also take into account that sometimes the legislature makes decisions that then changes our sub-area plan. So I'm actually curious how the new legislation has altered, changed, made us adapt, like the work that we did on the Canyon Park sub-area. Like what shifts are needed to occur in that. So like I said, I don't think we need to go in and make more work for ourselves, but I do think we need to see how they align and how they'll work together.
Yeah, so that is some of the work that we're doing. We are making sure that we go through all the sub-area elements to make sure that if there's any language that needs to be updated or tweaks or fixes to make sure that they're, like you said, aligning with each other and aligning with the designations in those sub-areas, that is there. So we aren't necessarily doing a Canyon Park or downtown level sub-area planning effort for every sub-area, but we are looking at them all to make sure that as we're going through the plan, everything is accurate and all of that. The one area that we are doing more significant sub-area planning is Country Village because of the candidate countywide growth center designation, and to reflect the fact that things have changed quite a bit in that sub-area in the last 5 to 7 years, and that it needs to be updated for that reason.
Yeah, and we still see that they're struggling to bring in more businesses, and it's likely a product of both a combination of housing nearby and transit. That, you know, they would be more successful as that economic center if we had more density and transit connecting to them. But thank you for the previous question, answer. That's really helpful. And maybe that had already been communicated, but given the kind of tenor of the conversation and where it was going, I just wanted to make sure that yes, there is kind of that touch of making sure that it's all working together. And that's really what the comprehensive plan is intended to do. Is we made a bunch of plans, and how are they working together, and how will they carry us into the future? So thank you.
Yeah, one kind of fun thing we're working on that I can talk about now that we have someone working on it now is we are working on putting together some iconography for the plan that will kind of help show the interconnections between different elements. So you have an idea of, the climate element is not in a silo, the land use element's not in a silo. There's goals and policies that may have interaction with other topics, but they primarily live here. So trying to give the reader an idea of oh, that's really cool. Maybe I'll go look at these plans and policies since they seem to be related here. So that's just kind of a fun aside. We like drawings.
All right. Do you have everything you need from us?
I believe so.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And I think, do we want to take 5 before? All right. All right. It's, how about 9? All right. We'll do 9. Yes, it's 9:21. We'll be back at 9:30. All right, welcome back. Next up, our last agenda bill of the night is 23121, the Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan 2024 Update Transportation Element. City Manager.
All right, and as noted, we do have a second comprehensive plan discussion today too. And just a few weeks ago, we had a previous study session on the transportation element, and we're coming back tonight with both Steve Morikawa, our Deputy Director of Public Works, and Cameron Kwan from Fair and Piers. I'm going to turn it over to Steve to introduce.
So good evening. Carmen Kwan of Fair and Piers, you remember her from a month ago. She'll be providing most of the presentation tonight. So as you heard before, the land use and transportation elements are very much tied together. Transportation system must support the planned growth, and to a certain extent, land use can optimize the transportation system. So they really have to work together and be thoughtful together. Land use planning will try to be proactive and strategic as possible to make the best use of the existing and future transportation system. Things like creating centers, locating density where transit provides robust service, those are the things that we look for. However, there can be things associated with growth that is more reactive from a transportation point of view. So like middle housing and ADU, how do you tell where that's going to occur? The state legislature has imparted kind of requirements and rules. So we have to live with that and figure out and make estimates as best we can on where that's going to occur. So it's more reactive rather than proactive. But regardless of what we do, there's going to be a couple things processes that we will go through, and Carmen's going to describe them for you tonight. So Carmen.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Sure. So one of the things we're going to keep doing over the next year and a half or longer is keep coming back to you, because ultimately when you vote to approve this, it's going to be way at the end. But we have to make decisions as we go along. The methodologies we use, you have to kind of support as we go along. We don't want to get to the very end and have somebody concerned about, hey, that's not the way we would have wanted going. So typically what we're going to do is exactly this. As we work through our processes, we're going to talk about them with you, and hopefully we'll get a head nod from you that says, yeah, we're kind of supportive of that. You're going in the right direction. Keep going. And that's how you're going to see us over the next few months. And so Carmen.
So tonight we're going to talk about the draft multimodal level of service policies that we had talked about earlier this month. And then we'll also talk about how that feeds into developing the 20-year transportation element project list. So starting with multimodal level of service policies, I just want to reiterate again, level of service is the promise of how a transportation system will perform. Under the city's current policies, it is focused on evaluating vehicle travel along main corridors in the city. And the current comp plan suggests measuring level of service policies for other modes, but there are no clear standards stated. So in terms of multimodal level service, I do want to share that this is a trend in the region. There are cities that have adopted multimodal level service, or they're thinking about it during their current comp plan update. And for each individual travel mode, there are definitely many different types of metrics that could be evaluated. Staff have held internal workshops over the last couple of months to consider the options for each travel mode. And today we're here to share some of the approach that staff are leaning towards. So for the first picture on the left, we're looking at auto travel, and staff are leaning towards maintaining the current system, which is measuring corridor level service and keeping it at a level service E standard. Staff has shared they like the flexibility that the corridor measurement provides, so that specific improvements are not held to a certain location but could depend on the corridor itself. For pedestrians, city staff are currently going through a pedestrian gap and connectivity analysis. So by having this policy shown here, city staff are committed to actually building out that system. Similarly, for bicycles, the draft policy of building a low-stress bicycle network would align with the citywide bike plan that was adopted late last year. And this policy would, again, commit the city to building out that network. The last mode is transit, which is a little bit more challenging because the city does not operate transit within the city itself. So the draft policies proposed are to coordinate with transit agencies to facilitate speed and reliability improvements along key corridors and to improve access to service, so improved access to bus stops. Moving along to the 20-year transportation project list, I just want to share this is one of the key outcomes of the transportation element update itself, is identifying for growth over the next 20 years, what types of transportation improvements are needed to support that. So tonight we're going to talk about the process that we go through to develop that 20-year project list. And this methodology, we'd like to get the head nod that this is the right approach from this group, as this fall we'll be coming back to share the outcomes of the analysis that we conduct over the summer. So starting at the top, we are developing a large list, a bucket project list of transportation improvements and programs for the city, and there are multiple inputs that go into that project list. First thing that we would refer to is the city's proposed multimodal level service policies, but we will also be taking into consideration community desires. We'll also be looking at currently adopted plans. For example, projects proposed in the Canyon Park sub-area plan, we would be carrying those over if they make sense. And then we're also updating the city's safety plan. So any outcomes from that update will feed into this project list, as well as any new information from our transportation resiliency task. The flowchart also, at the top here, we show the expanded unprioritized project list. So one thing to keep in mind is that we will be developing prioritization criteria to evaluate each project. And the purpose is that there are limited resources to invest in the transportation system, so we want to invest that where it's most needed. During this prioritization process, this will be our second touch point with the public, as it'll be an opportunity for the community to provide feedback on projects they feel are most important or needed to be constructed earlier than others. We will be going through the refinement of that prioritization process, and that'll also consider funding constraints. So considering what's feasible in terms of city resources over the next 20 years, we'll also compare and those resources against our prioritized project list to develop our final 20-year transportation element project list. And this will be our last touch point with the community as we go back to share kind of the final results of our analysis through our updated plan. We shared all of this with Planning Commission in early July, and there were a couple of comments they provided us. So in terms of multimodal level of service, they were very supportive of the transition to multimodal level of service and the proposed approach. There was a comment for transit they would also like to see policies that advocate for transit safety. Specifically, it mentioned access to bus stops, but it could also be coordinating with transit agencies on other safety concerns that they've identified. They also noted that they would like to address pedestrian connectivity through the use of crosswalks. The second item that they had provided input on was public engagement. And so they wanted to ensure that the transportation element participates with the overall comprehensive plan engagement process. So that would include things such as open houses in the fall and other city events. In addition to that, they also wanted to see additional outreach to those areas of the community that traditionally have not been heard before in transportation planning. So we are coordinating on separate efforts for that. Just as a reminder to the group, we are in the early stages of the transportation element update, where we're documenting existing conditions and evaluating future year land use scenarios over the remainder of the summer. This fall, we would expect to come back to this group with the findings of our land use, our analysis of the various land use alternatives, as well as our unprioritized project list. And then following through that first flow chart, we would be going through a funding availability analysis later this fall with a draft plan likely early next year. And that's all to align with the comprehensive plan schedule for council adoption late 2024.
So that's our presentation, and I would open up for discussion, questions, clarifications.
I'll go first. No, I mean, yes, I like the direction this is going. This makes my cold, dead politician heart feel warm and alive. And I appreciate the work that's been done on this already. Just a couple things. I want to make sure that we have an explicit focus on non-commuting trips. You've probably heard these things before, I'm sorry. Because that's a pretty big gap in our transportation network. And I've said this a few times before, I just want to move people through space as efficiently as possible from 3 points of view. The quantity of people you can move through space, financial efficiency over the long term, and greenhouse gas emissions. And if level of service E isn't functional on the corridor anymore, I would love the first option to be a more efficient option rather than simply expanding capacity that we know in 4 years will probably be filled back up again. But yes.
So let me ask a question. Non-commuting trips. How do you envision, or what do you envision improvements or? So typically when you do a comprehensive plan, I mean, you can get into as much detail as you have resources to spend and time to spend. So typically what we do is we try to build this transportation system that would support the land use requirements. Because typically, and that's typically AM or PM hour for vehicles. And then we assume a certain amount of people can use pedestrian facilities, bike facilities, and transit. So we make assumptions. Part of those assumptions are programs like I talked about before. So TDM programs, transportation demand management, refining our signal system, which we started to do, so the timing is better and that kind of thing. So typically when we come up with our projects, we're looking at the worst case because you don't size a road for the middle of the night, so to speak. So that's the projects we're going to come out with. The programs will help us go through encouraging people to use multiple modes. TDM programs, as an example, is one that would focus on non-commuting trips. So our CTR program, which is existing, focuses on large companies, but primarily commuting to and from work. Transportation demand management fills in the gap with smaller companies, individuals, residents, but it also goes off-peak hour. So those kind of things can help non-commuting trips. I just want to make sure I'm catching everything you would be interested in.
Making sure that we aren't just building a transportation system for, a suburban middle-aged white guy that goes and commutes downtown and back. Like something where we're connecting the multifamily areas to services with, protected bike lanes, things like that. So that we can use different modes of transportation for all trips, not just commuting trips. And I guess the one thing I would say in terms of the commuting trips is traffic is one of the best possible incentives to use transit. Like, I don't necessarily think that it's a problem so much as we've arrived at a space where we have to have more efficient ways of getting around that we can actually afford to maintain. So there are projects that I think are important for road capacity expansion. I'm not against all of them. Like, we need an extra lane on 527. We got to get the bus down here. But I want it to be a bus lane so that we can actually move people through space more quickly without the bus having to wait for cars.
Okay. So I think I'm hearing you say, well, the way I'm interpreting it might be wrong. We typically for a comp plan, we have to deal with capacity. That's one of our requirements. Your transportation system has to support your land use growth.
Totally.
But what I hear you saying is probably more like connectivity. So if somebody wants to get from point A to point B, there's a method to get to point A, point B. It doesn't matter if it's in the rush hour or not in the rush hour, but they can get there.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Well, that's especially important when flexible working hours are part of, or people are holding down two jobs. What did you say about a middle-aged white guy? Or did I just hear?
Traditionally, we have designed our transportation systems around commuting trips from suburbs into inner cities, and a lot of those people look like me. So we have spent the vast majority of our money and our time and our planning on that, as opposed to, moms taking their kids out to go to the park or to swim lessons or something like that.
But you're not disqualifying a segment of our population and economic drivers. You're just saying it's bigger than that.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not saying those trips don't matter. I'm saying that we need to focus on the other trips too.
Okay, no, I'm with you on that. I have very little to comment on this. I noticed that there was a comment about, can I just read the sentence to make sure I'm understanding? Staff are proposing no change to this current policy for motor vehicles. However, we're proposing policies to measure conditions for other modes to identify their accommodation and needs and develop a comprehensive modal project list. This is just for the framework, not over time. I would think over time we would be monitoring all those things. This is just for creating our policy, our 20-year.
We will be measuring them all.
Okay, all right. Yep. All right. And then I love some of the observations that Planning Commission came up to consider for pedestrians. I'm like, what other piece is an important piece that we missed? And I think they covered probably the key pieces. But the other thing that I just want to say, and I'm just going to stop here, besides thanking you for this work, is that you noted that part of, I'll read what's in the text here. Lastly, the Transportation Resiliency Review will identify potential infrastructure needs that are critical to evacuation and emergency response. And that's very comprehensive for what a city needs to be able to do. So thank you for putting that in there and considering that. I'm eager to see what transpires over the next year. So thank you.
Echoing the thanks. I know this is a big sort of lens shift as we look at transportation and even just how we plan for our land use if we're planning, not just around car trips, but around other ways to get around. So these are maybe slight off tracks, but as we talk about like pedestrian gaps and connectivity and making transit more reliable for people, I'm going to cite some specific examples, I think, just to help tell the story, but don't take this as this is the only situation in the city that could use some attention. So like 228th and up to Nike Hill, sidewalk on one side, you get people either running across, midway 3 lanes of people going very fast, or people having to go way out of their way to cross the street safely at a crosswalk, waiting for priority amongst the heavy traffic. So just looking at opportunities to not even necessarily add crosswalks, but have safe travel on both sides of the street so that it can be utilized for pedestrian use, putting trees in the grass patches that are next to the sidewalk so that there's shade as you're walking. And sort of on that note, and honestly, just if I'm going to look at Kyle, because this is just trees everywhere we can plant trees, like we don't have a tree canopy protection system yet. I don't know that we have a big growth plan for the trees, but any bit of right of way, let's put some trees in there. And as an often pedestrian against a sidewalk is great in the summer. And when I try to take the bus in the summer, there's sort of 2 things that come up. One, we don't have a lot of bus shelters around our bus stops. So I think if one of the improvements that we can use our funds for is to say, okay, we're adding density right near this bus stop because it's near a bus stop, put a shelter and some benches in for rain, for sun, whatever it is, just some weather protection. And just that makes taking the bus that much easier for someone. And the bench I think is really important. So I'm going to use myself as an example. I have a fairly invisible disability. There are times in my life where I have to use a cane or a mobility aid where I can walk but not stand still. So getting to a place and then standing for 15 to 20 minutes to wait for the bus can be the killer for that trip for me, and that's why I might take my car. And there are a lot of people in that situation. There are people who are not technically consider themselves disabled with a placard, but types of getting around are harder with whatever's going on with them. So just making sure that we're providing, like I said, benches and shelters, things that make taking alternate modes of transportation more accessible. Even if you're on a sidewalk, maybe not riding your bike on a sidewalk, but you can pull over and sit down for a minute, I think one of the reasons that people can default to cars is not because they don't want to lessen congestion or they don't want to set a good example or they don't want to reduce greenhouse gases, but because your car has a seat and they are hurt or they are, in my case, I would say tired, but whatever it is. So just that kind of focus on sort of these little bits that I think sometimes get lost as we talk about our system. And then I guess one thing I'm not quite clear on is how we weigh each mode when we look at this multimodal level of service. So we're keeping the E grade minimum with our corridor ratings and level of service ratings. What if the level of service is okay, but you can't walk that stretch? Like, how does that end up showing up when we evaluate things? I guess I'm not clear on if one mode is complete fail, but you can get through in a car, is it going to pass whatever the evaluation is?
So I think, and you can help me if I get this wrong, but the way I'm envisioning this is we have different silos of projects. We have vehicle projects, we have pedestrian projects, bike projects, safety projects, resiliency projects. Each of those buckets will have their own priorities, just like the bike program has its priorities already. We've already identified what our higher priorities are, okay? So the next things we're gonna do, and this is what we gotta figure out priority-wise, is how we're gonna prioritize across those buckets. So one way it could be is a particular street, and you bring up 228 because I love that one. It has some bike lanes, it has some sidewalks, it is a major east-west corridor, which we don't have very many. There are manufactured homes on either end. In the middle, there are retail areas that people want to get to. That one has a little bit of everything. I'm pretty sure it's on an emergency route, so resiliency would be there, and there are probably safety issues there. So that particular stretch of roadway may score very high because it hits across all the buckets, and depending what our priorities are, it may rank the highest. We may have standalone pedestrian projects or bike projects that are not combinable, but we want to see something, East Riverside Drive or something like that. The sidewalk is very important. The roadway might not be as unsafe, or capacity-wise, it might not be an issue. So standalone, that project might rise pretty high. So we'll have to figure out how to go through that through our prioritization system in a constrained environment, because we will have X amount of money. We're going to shoot for optimism, but we're going to have X amount of money in 20 years. And that means we won't finish all the lists and all the buckets. We will finish a portion of them. So in some buckets, you might get your number 1 and 2, and in some buckets, you might get your number 7 and 8, depending on how the thing is prioritized overall. I don't know if that helps.
Somewhat, probably as much as it can right now. So I'm cognizant of that, and I appreciate the budget constraints. I keep like sort of making it in my head sort of an analogy to when my kid wants to go to Disneyland every few months, and I'm like, yeah, that's not an every few months sort of deal. So I do totally get that, and I appreciate that we have to get very creative with this. The other thing, and this is something I thought of when we were talking about land use and density near schools. I guess this is just the day to cite my childhood in Bothell, but I had great community transit service from Canyon Park Junior High, middle school now, and Bothell High School, and some of those routes don't run to those places anymore. So as we advocate for routes, especially because youth ride free, I know I've said that already tonight, but like every middle school and high school in the city should have a bus going by it so that kids can get to jobs, or I realize middle school kids don't have jobs, hopefully, but services or friends' houses or whatever they're doing, right? Whatever that little bit of independence that they've earned from their parents and guardians, let's make sure we can support that. And I'm done.
So if you don't mind, you brought up one question. Not enough bus shelters, benches at bus shelters. So this is, like Carmen said, this is one of theirs where we typically don't do transit. We don't pay for transit. Transit typically will provide bus shelters, and they have their rules and regulations and how they prioritize it and everything. Typically, if you're outbound from Seattle, if you're waiting for the bus to go to Seattle, you typically would have a shelter. If you're going home from Seattle, you won't have a shelter. That's how they typically prioritize things. It might be changing now, but BRT stations will always have shelters. So there's rules and regs. So one of the questions in this level of service would be, do you want to spend city funds on those shelters, or would you rather advocate for those shelters, that the bus puts them there, or some combination thereof? And so that's something that staff will work on and come back with you and talk about. But again, we're trying to get the best bang for our buck. So where does that rise in priority-wise in terms of, hey, if we can advocate it and get more, but maybe not everything we want, but by not spending the money, we can do something else elsewhere that the city also prioritizes. Those are some of the things we have to think about.
Yeah, and I preliminarily, obviously, I want to see data on what is more likely to be successful, because I think just getting them is important for sure, for rain protection and sun protection too. But even just programs like, let's say I take a bus every day and me and my neighbors all meet up there and we're like, dang, we really want a shelter. What if we each kick in, $100 and want to buy a shelter, right? Like, I'd love to see just a variety of ways to get something done. So if someone reaches out and says, I want this here, we can say, okay, talk to community transit, or here's the cost of it. If you want to buy in through, we can buy so many benches at a time, like just different options for people. I think there are neighborhoods where a neighborhood could go in on that. And I think there are neighborhoods where you would not get anywhere with it. So really just giving people lots of options would be great. Maybe we go halvesies with community transit on some benches, however it works out. I'm not an expert in this, but just, I would love to see us get creative to make stuff happen.
Can I, oops.
No, go ahead. I was just going to just jump in real fast because I wanted to piggyback on the bus shelters. Like, obviously, as much as we can get other people to pay for it, yes, but if that's vague, not happening, or years out, then we could act. The idea you had is like go halvesies on it. Like, if the transit agencies knew that their dollars would go twice as far by putting bus shelters in Bothell as opposed to somewhere else, I would be very interested in that.
It's bus shelter theme. I was thinking during the presentation, Bellevue's big transit center. And then I thought, oh yeah, but you gotta be big like Bellevue in order to get something like that. So I love hearing this brainstorming that's going on here and your suggestions. And, you know, maybe when we talk about Main Street, maybe that's where the city would step in and create its own shelter. But yes, in as much as the transit agencies would weigh in on creating shelters, maybe that we would get some ownership on some routes staying put. And I love the idea of getting community. So I'm just here to amen everything that's going on. I love the discussion.
And bus shelters add opportunities for community art, as your former Girl Scout council member who got to paint some can tell you.
Anytime you're saying let's paint public space, I'm in. I love that. Yes, not, you know, official channels only, but please, public art. So to start, I think you're in a good, you're running in a good direction here, and that's really what you want to know from us. I do have some specific questions and some feedback. It sounds to me like there's probably going to be a bit of a scoring guide sort of way of prioritizing, which we are familiar with and we've seen before. Is that accurate? There'll be like some kind of ranked way of scoring these things?
Yes,
Okay.
we will be creating a prioritization criteria with staff and then scoring projects.
Great. Yeah. And that can be really effective in helping us figure out, you know, where that alignment is between community need and implementability. And so I love that. I do want to say that I loved that you had the little public engagement logo in the phases of the plan where you would have public engagement. That the key down there, it was, anyway, I just appreciate thoughtful little details like that. And I saw it and I wanted to tell you that I appreciated it. So once again, okay, we got to see the overlays side by side, which is better than seeing them on top of each other because that can be very confusing. And so I was really grateful to see that visual of all of the overlays side by side. And then at some point, I do hope that we can find some way to visualize how they all work together. And I'm hearing that is coming, and I'm grateful for that. I'm glad that will be happening. One thing that, again, comes to mind is when we're talking about our corridors, like absolutely maintain the E standard that we have. But I'd really like to see a couple of the gaps filled in if we possibly could. And this may not be this comprehensive plan. It may be a future comprehensive plan, but the gaps around Valhalla Norway Hill is very clear to me. If you want to go back and look at the map, we can. And then the other gap that I'm seeing, Councilmember Dodd brought up a few weeks ago, it really just needs a off-ramp to connect the neighborhoods to 405 up in North Bothell. And if we could create that connection, I think we'd be able to fill in some gaps. And like I said, I don't know if this is in the next 10-year plan, but if it could be, I think that would serve our community well. Last thing is when we did our vision setting, we very much said tree-lined streets. And so to Councilmember Dodd's point, every place that we do an improvement project, if we can put trees, then that will help us achieve our goal of tree-lined streets. And that has lots of health benefits and environmental benefits as well. So yes to trees, and yes to art, and cute little logos. Thanks.
May I clarify Valhalla Norway Hill Gap?
Yeah, can we go to that map?
Can try.
It's the corridor map.
Yeah, the level of service map, I think. Okay.
That one, yes. Okay, so I see 100th is connecting from 145th up to the bend in the river. I would love to see that line be a corridor, because then we have our corridors connecting. And then, is that clear? Does that make sense? Sorry, too loud.
Sorry, try again. Is it, I'm trying to put my arrow, but
Do we have a pointer?
I'm trying to.
There you go. That one. Yes.
This one
that.
right here?
If that could become a corridor too.
Okay.
Maybe to understand why we don't measure that, because this is just where we measure, right? Like you can drive across that, but
Yes.
I think helping us understand why we measure these specific corridors and why we don't measure some of the connections will just help us understand.
So we will look at corridors. We can look at that one and see if it rises to the level. Again, the arterial corridors, the measurement just gives us a feeling of the state of how well vehicles can move about the city, because we can't measure every single intersection and local street and everything.
No.
There are a couple ones that we are also looking at, I would tell you, would be perhaps Meridian and 240th here. And since we have a major BRT coming down 185th, that might make sense as well, because we want to ensure the performance of that. So we will add that as something to look at, the one you just said.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, thank you for calling out those other two areas as well, because I know we've mentioned them previously, but I think it's good to say if we can prioritize those, let's do it.
Okay,
Thanks. Sorry, I had one more thing. I overlooked it. So sorry, Ben.
Ben finally. Finally was like, okay, I'll do it.
When you were talking about public engagement, you said trying to outreach to communities that are typically overlooked in our public engagement. And we just had a really successful partnership with Eastside for All when it came to middle housing. And so if we could build upon that partnership and if they were amenable to it, I would point to them as a group that is really effective at exactly the type of outreach you're talking about. I'd love to see that partnership continue. Thank you. Okay, now, go ahead.
I don't have much. I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I'm on board with this plan. I like that we're going to maintain the E rating. I think there's some areas just are never going to get back to D or C, and if we can keep it an E, that's better than F. So, but I do like the plan. I am excited about the public engagement as well. I think the last time we did something like this, where we had the map that you can click on and drop icons in and write, like near miss and suggest improvements. I thought that was really interesting to see what people are seeing that we may not see every day. People who are using those stretches that we may not use, or that are using it a different way. So I think this is great. I'm on board with the trees. There's something about tree-lined streets, whether you're walking, biking, or driving, you just feel good when you're in that kind of environment. So the more of that we can have as we continue to grow, the better.
Can I just say, I love tree-lined streets. When we were having that discussion this winter, it was great. And I love the fact that it is cooling down some of the ambient temperature on the pavement. But I'm apologizing now to our public works. That's all I want to say.
I like that. Trees have consequences. That's important to remember, but lots of benefits too. It's a good point. And I'm going to say two things. One, with the trees, I know that trees cost money. Again, I think there are some neighborhoods where you might see a lot of efforts to chip in for trees, right? So having more programs where, because everybody knows how to reach out and say, I want this in the city. And I think the more options we have to come back and one, explain how that can happen, but also here's how you could take on some activism, right? Talk to your neighbors. A tree costs, I'm going to say $10 because I'm going to make up a number. This is getting very Arrested Development reference, but so just those kind of programs I think can really help. It's not going to help every neighborhood, but can help certain neighborhoods. I think about, I'm pointing at you because you live there, but in West Hill with the traffic calming, that was people advocating for their neighborhood through a program. So I think that that's just a great example.
And they also crowdfunded the Conifer View signs.
Yeah, so
like,
just there are
there's
some neighborhoods
efforts to do
where
that.
you have those connections and it works out really well. And there and to be clear, that can't be the solution for everywhere too. The other thing, what you had said about the last time we had a map, and it was really helpful. I want to make sure that the feedback we get on these maps lives in perpetuity. You know, if we ask for feedback, it shouldn't just disappear when that initiative is over. And then if nothing was changed in one specific area, you're just giving the same feedback on a new map. Like, especially, I think it's a good opportunity to track these longer term requests. And if we can't tell a story of we heard you and here's what changed, we do need to be able to tell the story of we heard you and here's why something didn't change. So really just making sure that we're following up no matter what happens, I think is really important.
We're not asking somebody the same question 10 years later that they answered 10 years ago and we didn't do anything about it.
Now I'm on my third decade here and I'm just
Yeah.
like, you get tired of answering the same questions. And not to say that there hasn't been a lot of change too, but yeah, I think it's something we owe people for sure.
Well, and there's an accountability piece. I tried to be sly. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Mom.
There is an accountability piece there too. When, if that map disappears and that feedback disappears, then how do people go back and check and say, was my feedback, like, has something changed? Has something happened? And it's a way for, future staff people, future councils to identify gaps where, if consistently this feedback has been gotten and we haven't been able to get to it, then it might be time to prioritize that to get to it. And the public needs to be able to hold everybody accountable to what does get done and what does not get done. Thank you.
One more question that's kind of out of left field. I'm sorry. You're probably used to that by now, Steve. In terms of traffic calming overall, is that something that is appropriate for this discussion in terms of how we would plan for that on our existing streets?
Yes, but I think how we implement it is probably the key. So we actually have traffic calming. It went away, it came back. We also have like safety corridor programs that we can use. I think one of the council's priorities is revisiting speed limits for local streets. We're also revisiting it on a couple arterials right now. So I think it's all part and parcel in how we kind of pull it together. I sense a lot of these things won't be projects per se. They will be programs or policies. And then we will have to prioritize it and say, well, how much is traffic calming versus safety versus sidewalks versus how much do you want to allocate for each of these programs?
Because it doesn't really matter what neighborhood you go to in Bothell and talk to people, like a substantial amount of people are like, can you just do something to slow the cars down? Like if there were a speed bump program, if there were, I mean, I know there's some chicanes up in Conifer View, things like that. Like if there were something simple and inexpensive that we could do to slow the cars down through people's neighborhood, I'd like that.
Like add more stop signs.
Or just speed bumps or chicanes or just, put a little
narrowing
thing. Sorry for the technical language.
Narrowing is not technical. So I think there's a couple of ways we're going to do this. And one of the things we plan to start doing as part of the comp plan, but separately as well, is talk to departments overall on safety. And safety could mean speed limits as well and traffic calming, right? It's all part of safety. So it's a holistic view. So we will start that, and that's part of the comprehensive plan. Not sure how far we will get through that because there are a lot of different types of safety issues. As an example, yes, there are many different things we can do. On certain roads, we have everything. We have a crosswalk, we have it flashing, we have a speed radar sign, we have something else in there, and people are still speeding. That tells me it's more the design of the road, which in the 50s and 60s and 70s were wider is better, and now it's getting narrower. Those are very expensive. So if you can imagine how many collector roads we have, we probably wouldn't do it on local roads, but let's say collector roads. How many of our roads are collectors, and how much would it cost us to move the curbs and trees and everything in? it's quite a big cost. So what we can do now is make sure when we develop our new design standards as part of this, is make sure that we consider what the future will be. So we don't continue with what we've done in the past. And then we got to come up and figure out how many programs and what we can do to address existing roadways that are too wide, and we need to do other things to slow people down. And again, I think it's a holistic approach. I talked about the safe system approach, and that's really what we're going to try to do. It's physical thing, it's enforcement, it's education, and then we don't have control of cars and everything, but we can certainly educate people, and that's the bigger thing.
The one thing I would push back on is I think some of the neighborhood roads would be really appropriate for it, because we do have neighborhood roads that people cut through on a pretty regular basis for other areas. Just a couple off the top of my head. And if you're coming up Brickyard, turning left is really difficult on Brickyard to 160th. So people hang a left and go through that neighborhood where it comes out by North Shore Middle School, and they drive through there real fast, and that's treated kind of like a collector. And then like over in Norway Hill, when Juanita Woodinville is backed up, they turn left on 145th and go south through that neighborhood, like to get to Cedar Park in the morning. There's a couple neighborhood roads that are really used as collector roads where I think it would be really appropriate to have something like that. And like, it would just be cool if there was some kind of a program where we're like, here's what we do on these roads. We have speed bumps, we have chicanes, like here's how much we can do every year. I don't know.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you the interesting part. We're trying to provide more connectivity, but as an example, I live in North Seattle and it's all a grid system. So typically you can get through many roads and they still behave like local roads because there's so many options and one road is not being used. But I do live near one road that because of wetlands and streams, it's the only one down. And that one is terrible. So as we connect and we try to do connectivity, it's not an easy exercise because if we want to connect point A to point B across the neighborhood and that's the only one, that existing local road gets to be like you just said. And so the people living there are not for it because all of a sudden they're on a collector, they're not on a local road. So that's part of the difficulty in the connectivity part. We have to be very thoughtful. And what are we trying to connect? Are we trying to connect vehicles? Are we trying to connect peds and bikes? Because connecting neighborhoods with ped and bikes would be a lot easier and it wouldn't have that same issue. Although people still say, well, now I have 54 people walking down my road every day. So those are the things that we're kind of up against and we're trying to balance. So we will probably get started with connectivity, but we think it's a longer project. One of your first priorities is connectivity of neighborhoods. We think we probably can set up policies and things and look at some of the low-hanging fruit, but it might be a longer program to try to change how Bothell is connected to each other because over the last 100 years it developed a certain way. So, yeah.
Can I get philosophical for a moment? I know it's late when we start getting philosophical. But one of the things you said was about change and when change needs to occur. And for me, I really like to go back to there are two kinds of errors where you keep something you should reject and where you reject something you should keep. And I don't want to change things for the sake of change. Like if we're changing things, but it's something that we should have kept because the correct solution is that we needed to preserve, maintain, and continue. Like there are many things in life that are tried true. There's a reason why they're done that way, and we need to preserve them. And it's a mistake to change it just because we can. And then on the other side, there is things that we keep that we actually need to change because it is doing harm, or we could improve, quality of life for people. And so when that's just kind of my philosophical contribution to the discussion is we are not here to make changes that should not be made. We are here to make changes that should be made. And to, have the wisdom to know the difference. And that's why we look to you as staff for that. So thanks for letting me get philosophical for a moment.
All right. It seems like we've wrapped up the conversation. Is there anything else you need from us? Nope. Thank you very much. All right, council conversations.
Who is eager to start their summer? I just wanted to tell you guys, I hope you have a fabulous August break, and I'll probably see you on some of these events. And to staff, have a fabulous summer break from us, and hope you get some bites of summer yourself.
Bye, Quan.
Yeah, summer break is coming up. Everybody vote first, right?
Yep.
That's all I got. I just want to say vote. So please vote. That's it.
I'll add on to the voting topic. I know that there are some very enthusiastic voters in our community. And, you know, who bemoan that they only get one vote, which is literal fraud. So don't ever vote more than once. But for those people who are really into voting and who, you know, wish they could vote more and harder, my answer to them is that is when you get involved and get out the vote efforts. Help your neighbors vote. Encourage them to vote. You know, wear your sticker. You know, encourage, because we often see that ballot return results are very low, and we're only hearing from about a third of our community in a good election. And so that number really needs to change, and it really does come down to our efforts to encourage our community members to be engaged and to fulfill their civic duty. One idea I have, I'm not saying it's a good one, I'm just saying it's an idea, is in the week up to voting day, go around knocking on people's doors and handing out stickers to the people who have voted. I don't care who you vote for, but I just want to know that you voted. And that I would love to see, you know, I would just love to see one more stickers. It is a sad thing that we don't get stickers in our ballots. Wouldn't it be nice? The fact that our postage is now paid is the best thing ever, but stickers would make it even better. And so I just, you know, encourage people, you know, vote your heart out on your one wild vote, and then tell your friends to vote too. Thanks.
I would say too, this is going to sound funny, but hear me out. Vote with someone, vote with friends, right? My dad and I combined our households a few years ago for various reasons, and we always vote together. We read the pamphlet, we go through. Sometimes we convince each other of things we didn't know. You could make it a social thing with people that you want to make it a social thing with. There's a lot there. And the other thing is if you can't get that connection through people you know, there are lots of nonpartisan ways to encourage voting, not of a specific topic or for a specific person, but just to encourage it. And the last thing is there are weird ways to volunteer. I've driven people to the ballot box before, because it's weird to just say, I'll take your ballot, but you're like, I'll drive you there so you can put it in. And my favorite thing, and I have a lot of coworkers in Indiana, and one time we realized the day after Election Day that coworker A had driven coworker B's wife to a polling place because he was just out offering rides to people. And apparently in Indiana, you can just accept a ride from a stranger, but it turned out that you know, they were sort of coworker adjacent people. So it was really fascinating just to see people pitching in, and there's a lot of opportunities to do that. Not necessarily saying take rides from strangers, but you can find creative ways. I really like your idea of handing out stickers, or just, you know, you can say, did you vote, without saying, did you vote for? And that can just be a way to start a conversation. Thank you.
All right. Conversations round up. Hand gavel. We're adjourned.
Recording stopped.